Chapter 2957. Xia Fenglu stiffened and replied calmly, "I've known him for a long time. Senior sister, you can't befriend this person. Ignore him." Ji Xinyue, this Huang Qinglu obviously had other thoughts about Xia Fenglu. She didn't believe that her junior brother couldn't tell. If he could tell and still allowed Huang Qinglu to be by his side, then she would have to reconsider. She had only asked about Huang Qinglu, and this junior brother of hers was already so nervous. Could it be that he was jealous? Alright, a friend's wife shouldn't be bullied. Since Huang Qinglu was her junior brother's sweetheart, she should keep her distance. Maybe Huang Qinglu could become her sister-in-law. However, looking at the way the two of them interacted, why did she feel that her junior brother would become her wife? If they really became a couple, what should she call Huang Qinglu? Sister-in-law. Sister-in-law. Xia Fenglu naturally didn't know that his senior sister's thoughts had already spread out 8,000 miles. Huang Qinglu had already finished roasting a fish and handed it to Xia Fenglu. "Try it and see how my cooking is." Xia Fenglu took the fish and removed all the bones, then handed it to Ji Xinyue. "Senior sister, try it first." Ji Xinyue. She seemed to see Huang Qingliu's murderous gaze. She waved her hand. "No need, you can eat it yourself." Afraid that Xia Fenglu would desperately refuse, she added, "See if it's salty." Xia Fenglu then retracted his hand. "Alright, I'll try it first. I know senior sister's taste, so I should be able to taste if it suits you." Ji Xinyue. "Brat, are you here to make enemies for me?" She felt that the temperature around her seemed to drop by 1 or 2 degrees. She couldn't help but look at her junior brother and then at Huang Qinglu. She felt that she was unnecessary. Ji Xinyue decisively took a fish over. "I'll roast it myself. It's not right to always let brother Huang roast it alone." Xia Fenglu. Huang Qinglu laughed. "It's fine, I'm used to doing this." "Princess Xinyue, you don't have to interfere." Ji Xinyue thought, "If I don't interfere, you might stab me in the back." She processed the fish quickly and soon put it on the fire. "It's okay. I like to eat my own roasted fish." At this point, Huang Qinglu did not say anything else. Ji Xinyue concentrated on roasting the fish. Just as the fish was about to be cooked, Xia Fenglu, who was sitting at the side, suddenly shouted, "Kai Guang! Look, there's colorful light over there." Hearing this, Ji Xinyue raised her head and looked in the direction he was pointing. Her eyes lit up. There were colorful lights in the distant horizon. The colorful lights flickered and flickered. It was extremely beautiful. It was Ji Xinyue's first time seeing this kind of light. Her heart skipped a beat, and she asked excitedly, "Could it be that the moonlight clam's pearl is shining?" That's not the case. It's a special kind of weather in this place. It's called the light of mirage, and it often appears here. As for the moonlight clams, now is not the time for them to appear. Once they appear, they will emit a kind of crimson light, which is very easy to identify. Huang Qinglu was obviously an expert in this area, and she was imparting knowledge to the siblings. Ji Xinyue's heart skipped a beat. "Brother Huang seems to be very familiar with this place. Have you been here before?" Huang Qinglu flipped the fish in her hand as she replied, "Yes, no one is more familiar with this place than me." Ji Xinyue was a little puzzled. This place could be said to be incomparably desolate. Not even a blade of grass grew here. If he was familiar with this place, then he must have come here often. Why did he come here often? Chapter 2958. She grilled the fish as she pondered. Inadvertently, she glanced at the mirage again. With this glance, she was suddenly stunned. The rainbow-colored mirage slowly unfurled like a painting, and pavilions gradually began to appear within the painting. What appeared in the painting seemed to be a tea house. There were two people sitting opposite each other by the window of the tea house. One of them was handsome and carefree. It was Rong Yu Tianlan. Sitting across from him was a young girl in white. Her hair was like clouds, and her appearance was extremely beautiful. Her every move carried a kind of romantic charm. The two of them seemed to be playing chess. Both of them were focused. A waiter brought over a plate of exquisite new snacks and placed it beside Rong Yu Tianlan. Rong Yu Tianlan glanced at it and pushed it to the young lady in white. She seemed to say something. The young lady in white smiled sweetly and took the snack. She stretched out her snow-white hand and picked up a piece. She put it in her mouth and tasted it for a moment. Then, she nodded at Rong Yu Tianlan, as if she liked it very much. Rong Yu Tianlan also smiled and said a few more words to the waiter. The waiter immediately nodded and bowed before leaving. The young lady in white covered her small mouth and looked at Rong Yu Tianlan from the corner of her eyes. Because only images were shown and there was no sound, Ji Shenyu did not know what they were talking about. She only saw the two of them talking and laughing happily. The young lady was a standard beauty. Her every move revealed a different style and elegance. It was a kind of elegance that came from her bones. It could not be compared to the elegance that Yu Shuashang deliberately put on. The two of them chatted and played chess. The scene looked unusually harmonious and beautiful. A word would appear in one's mind, perfect couple. They were truly a perfect couple. Senior sister, your fish is burnt. Xia Fingliu's shout brought Ji Shenyu back to her senses. She hurriedly lowered her head and found that half of her grilled fish was burnt. Just now, Huang Qingliu's grilled fish had only burnt a layer of fish skin. She had burned half of the fish. The fish was almost burning. Senior sister, your hand. Without any explanation, Xia Fenglu threw the skewer of fish in her hand away. Looking at her palm, he said in a bad tone, "It's so hot that it's blistering." Ji Shenyu also lowered her head and looked at her palm. She had been too focused on watching the scene just now, and the flame had directly licked the metal skewer, causing it to turn red from the heat, and even scalding her palm. "I'm fine, it's just a blister." Ji Shenyu retracted her hand, and took out a golden sore ointment to apply to the blisters on her palm. Xia Fenglu quickly stopped her. "No, this is not for burns. This medicine is for snake venom. Senior sister, you took the wrong medicine." Ji Shenyu looked at the medicine in her hand and couldn't help but smile. "These two medicine bottles are too similar, I took the wrong one." She took the medicine back and took out another bottle. This time, he didn't make a mistake. Xia Fengliu's expression did not look good. He looked at her without saying a word. After Ji Shenyu finished applying the medicine, her gaze swept over the illusory scene in the distance. "Is that the legendary mirage? I didn't expect to see an acquaintance there." Huang Qinglu nodded. "It is indeed a mirage." According to the principle of a mirage, this scene was not created for no reason. It was just an image of a certain place being refracted by the atmosphere. In other words, everything on the screen was real. It had really happened. Chapter 2959. It might be happening right now, or it might have happened in the past. Xia Fenglu glanced at the image and suddenly sneered. "Senior sister, I remember telling you that Rongyue Tianlan wanted to fight for a sword for a woman. This was the woman I saw at that time." Ji Xinyue looked at the woman carefully. "She looks unfamiliar. And looking at the immortal light around her, she should be at the level of a supreme god. There were very few women on this continent who could cultivate to the level of a supreme god. They could be said to be as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. If this woman was from this continent, it would be impossible for such a beautiful woman to be unknown to the public with her cultivation level." Xia Fenglu also nodded. She is indeed unfamiliar. This is also my first time seeing her. He then turned to look at Huang Qinglu. What about you? You are experienced and knowledgeable. Have you seen her before? Huang Qinglu shook her head. No. She then pondered for a moment. Maybe she is not from this continent. Xia Fenglu clapped his hands. That's possible. After all, this supreme immortal Rongyue left this continent for a period of time. This could be a woman he dated on another continent. This person is so romantic. He must have many female confidants on other continents. I didn't expect this one to find him here. Look at them, their relationship is quite good. Ji Xinyue did not say anything else. She patted the moon god's sword that was suspended there. Can you go catch a few more fish? The moon god's sword was just about to show itself when it immediately dived into the sea and disappeared. A moment later, it indeed skewered 4 more fish. This mirage took an unusually long time. Ji Xinyue roasted 2 fish in a row, but the image did not disappear. It was still going on in an orderly manner. The 2 of them had been drinking tea and playing chess, occasionally exchanging a few words. During this period of time, a multicolored bird flew over and stopped on the white-clothed girl's shoulder, combing its feathers, looking very spirited. The girl gently stroked the colorful bird's feathers, smiling sweetly. Rongyue Tianlan's gaze also fell on the bird. He took out a blue fruit from somewhere and personally fed it to the bird. The bird was obviously familiar with Rongyue Tianlan. It jumped onto his palm and pecked at the fruit. This bird is a soul-searching bird. Huang Qingliu's eyes were filled with surprise. Ji Xinyue raised her eyebrows. Brother Huang recognizes this bird. Huang Qinglu nodded. I've seen it once, but it's extremely rare. It is said that this kind of bird can directly recognize a person's soul and is used to seeing through all disguises. Ji Xinyu was a little absent-minded. She nodded and casually replied, "It is indeed miraculous." In front of this bird, it seems that anyone's disguise is useless. Huang Qinglu nodded. That should be the case. I've only heard of it, but I don't know its specific functions. However, I heard that this kind of bird is extremely difficult to feed. It doesn't eat the 5 grains, wolves, or any kind of meat. It lives on blades and swords. Now, even Xia Fenglu was curious. Feeding on swords and knives. What a strange bird. No, it's eating the fruit now. That fruit is not an ordinary fruit, it's the Suan spirit fruit. This bird will occasionally eat this kind of fruit as a snack. Xia Fengliu's mouth was half open. Is that the Suan spirit fruit? This fruit can help one to pass through the tribulation. It's something that people in the Jianghu yearn for even in their dreams. I didn't expect him to feed it to someone else's bird. Huang Qinglu waved her fan and smiled. Perhaps the bird was raised by both of them. Can everyone guess who that white-clothed girl is? Chapter 2960. Xia Fenglu looked at it for a moment and nodded. That's true. This bird seems to be very familiar with Supreme Immortal Rongyu. Perhaps they really raised it together. As they spoke, the bird had already finished eating the fruit. It jumped twice in Rongyu Tianlan's palm, looking very happy. Rongyu Tianlan was also very happy. With a flip of his wrist, a shiny dagger appeared in his palm. Ji Xinyue's heart skipped a beat. That dagger was a gift from the hidden sword manor to everyone. It seemed that Rongyu Tianlan had also received one. Furthermore, his dagger was obviously of a higher grade than the others. There was a faint glow on the tip of the dagger. It should already have a little bit of spirituality. The bird immediately lowered its head to peck at the dagger. With one bite, the dagger was missing a piece. The bird's body was not big, but it ate the dagger like it was tofu. It did not take long for it to finish eating the dagger. The girl in white continued to watch everything with a smile. After the bird finished eating, she beckoned to it. The bird immediately flew to her palm and rubbed its beak affectionately against her palm. Then, it turned its head and looked at Rong Yuetian eagerly, as if it had not had its fill. Huang Qinglu smiled and shook her head. This bird is really precious. It's eating too high-end. Xia Fenglu looked at the divine sword that was hanging beside Ji Xinyue. I think this moon god's sword is probably not enough for it to eat. The moon god's sword was immediately angry. The tip of the sword pointed at the bird in the mirage. Suddenly, it buzzed and rushed towards the mirage like lightning. It looked like it wanted to kill the bird when it saw its own kind being destroyed. Ji Xinyue shook her head. Although the moon god's sword had spirituality, it was still a sword. It could not tell that the mirage was actually an illusion. Hey, isn't that the hidden sword Manor Lord? Xia Fenglu shouted again. Ji Xinyue looked up and saw the Manor Lord of the Hidden Sword Manor appear out of thin air in the tea house. His face was a little red and there were beads of sweat on his forehead. It was obvious that he was in a hurry. The Manor Lord did not bother to exchange greetings with the two of them. With a flip of his palm, a blue crescent weapon appeared in his hand and he handed it to Rong Yuetianlan. Obviously, this crescent weapon was specially made for Rong Yuetianlan. Rong Yuetianlan's eyes lit up. She stood up and took the weapon. She flicked it with her fingers. The crescent weapon was as blue as the sky without a trace of impurities. The flowing light seemed to have stars twinkling on it. There was no need to test the blade. Just by looking at the color of this crescent-shaped weapon, one could tell that this was definitely an extremely rare divine weapon. Although it might not be as good as the lunar god's sword, it was better than any other weapon Ji Xinyu had ever seen. Rong Yuetian sized up the weapon a few times, and a gratified look appeared in her eyes. She then passed it to the girl in white. The girl in white took it and stroked the crescent blade inch by inch with her fingers. She nodded slightly at Rong Yuetian. Rong Yuetian seemed to be relieved. She thanked the villa master of the Hidden Sword Villa and even handed him a dark golden medal. Huang Qinglu muttered, black gold iron. This exalted immortal Rong Yu is truly extraordinarily generous. Xian gold iron was one of the best materials for crafting weapons. A piece the size of a finger could be worth tens of thousands of gold. It was even more precious than diamonds. It was also priceless and could not be bought. But the piece that Rong Yuetianlan handed to the villa master was as big as a dog's head. This piece could be said to be priceless. If this material was used to craft a weapon, it would definitely be forged into a divine weapon that was comparable to the lunar god's sword. Chapter 2961. The Manor Lord's usually cold face couldn't help but reveal joy. He thanked Rong Yuetianlan, then happily carried the black gold iron away. Rong Yuetianlan's gaze fell on the crescent blade. He let out a sigh of relief and gestured to the soul-seeking bird on the white-clothed girl's shoulder. The soul-seeking bird couldn't hold back and immediately flew down. It stretched out its curved beak and began to peck at the crescent blade. He spent so much effort to get the Manor Lord of Hidden Sword Manor to make this crescent blade just to feed the bird. Xia Fenglu clenched his fists. He hated this kind of wasteful behavior the most. He looked at Ji Xinyue again. Looks like helping you get the sword was just something he did casually. His main purpose in coming to Hidden Sword Manor was this crescent blade. Ji Xinyue smiled. I have nothing to do with him anymore. It's already good enough that he helped me get the sword. Even if it's just a casual gesture, it's still a kindness. I'm still very grateful. I will definitely repay this kindness. She took a light breath and looked around. The moonlight clam should be drying soon, right? Huang Qinglu nodded. It should be soon. The mirage finally disappeared, and so did the light from the mirage. The sky and earth returned to a faint blue color. The moon god's sword finally flew back. It obviously didn't achieve its goal, and the entire sword looked listless. Ji Xinyue began to tidy up her clothes, preparing to enter the water. According to Huang Qinglu, the moonlight clam would only open for an hour to absorb the essence of the sun and moon. After an hour, it would close its shell and sink into the deep sea ice, where it couldn't be dug out. Therefore, they had to act quickly and finish within an hour. Xia Fenglu looked at the busy Ji Xinyue and couldn't help but frown. Senior sister, the water here is too cold. It's not good for a girl's body. Wait here later, Huang Qinglu and I will go down. Ji Xinyue was already prepared. She glanced at Xia Fenglu. When have you ever seen me waiting to eat ready-made food? The underwater environment is complicated, and your swimming skills are average. If something really happens, you won't be able to buy any medicine for regret. If that really happens, I'll bang my head against the wall. Xia Fenglu was touched. Senior sister, I didn't know you cared about me so much. Ji Xinyue pulled up her sleeves. Of course I care about you. If anything happens to you under my watch, Master will skin me alive. He then pulled off the jade pendant from his waist and threw it into his hand. How many times have I told you? When you go out to do something, don't bring so many random things with you, lest you get hooked by something. Okay, I'll be careful. Xia Fenglu was obviously used to being scolded. Not only was he not angry, but he was also happy to endure it. Paw! The profound ice beneath Huang Qingliu's feet cracked. Ji Xinyue glanced at him. Huang Qinglu had a smile on his face, but there seemed to be a chill around him. He did not look at Ji Xinyue and Xia Fenglu. Instead, he turned his head and looked towards the far east. The moonlight clam has opened its shell. A crimson light shot out from the surface of the sea and into the sky. The light was even more brilliant than the rosy clouds, illuminating the entire sky in an instant. The moon god's sword was obviously excited. The sword shadow moved and was about to attack first. Huang Qinglu gripped the sword hilt and said calmly, once the moonlight clam is disturbed, it will immediately close its shell. If it really senses danger, it will immediately destroy the clam pearl. At that time, all our efforts will be for naught. So if we want to pluck the pearl, we need to ambush it. Chapter 2962. After he finished speaking, he let go of the moon god's sword's hilt and said politely, "Excuse me." The moon god's sword returned to Ji Xinyue's side. Ji Xinyue put it back into its scabbard and said, "If I don't tell you to come out, don't come out." She was afraid that the sword would be disobedient and cause trouble, so she put it in her storage space. The moon god's sword was actually very obedient this time, and let Ji Xinyue hide it, without any resistance. Because they were prepared in advance, the three of them entered the water smoothly, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Although she was mentally prepared and had done enough homework to protect herself, when she entered the water, Ji Xinyue still felt the bone-chilling cold. The water was far colder than she imagined, and once she entered the water, her hands and feet felt like they were going to freeze. She circulated her energy a few times, and only then did she regain her senses. Although Xia Fenglu was a man, and his body was more masculine, his cultivation was not as good as Ji Xinyue's. Not long after he entered the water, his nose was blue and his face was white. His teeth chattered non-stop, and he fell behind in a moment. Ji Xinyue was afraid that he would faint in the water, and was about to go over to take a look when she heard the sound of water splashing. Huang Qinglu, who had been leading the way, suddenly flipped over and went straight for Xia Fenglu. Without any explanation, he grabbed Xia Fengliu's hand. Xia Fengliu wanted to struggle, but he was obviously not Huang Qingliu's opponent in the water, and was restrained in a moment. Then he was dragged forward by him. He quickly caught up with Ji Xinyu and asked, "How are you? Do you want me to bring you?" Ji Xinyu shook her head. She had already adapted to the temperature of the water. "No need, I can do it myself." Huang Qingliu glanced at her, and did not force her, and said, "Then be careful." He brought Xia Fengliu forward. He kept holding Xia Fengliu's arm tightly, and Xia Fengliu gritted his teeth and said, "Don't leave my senior sister behind. Don't have any bad ideas." Huang Qingliu narrowed his eyes and chuckled, "Be good, I won't do anything to her." "Young master, I care about what you care about. I've been helping you all this time, haven't I? Who needs your help?" "I said, I'm not your young master, you've got the wrong person." That's a mistake." Huang Qingliu's tone was casual. She swam in the water like a pike. Her posture was graceful and natural, as if she was born here. "You." Xia Fengliu was so angry that he trembled. He suddenly sneered, "You keep calling me young master, but you don't give me any respect. How else do you want me to respect you?" Huang Qingliu raised an eyebrow. "In front of others, haven't I always not fought back when you hit me or scolded me? Isn't it just helping you with this and that? But how can we force the young lord to do something? You often disregard my wishes and force me to do things. Is this your attitude towards young master? That's because you haven't awakened yet." Huang Qingliu's voice was gentle. "When you truly awaken, I naturally won't be able to force you." Xia Fengliu clenched his fist. "Awakening. Awakening. Wake up like a ghost." He just didn't want to wake up. He did a good job as Xia Fengliu. The only thing that made him unhappy was that Huang Qingliu was sticking to him like candy. He couldn't get rid of her, he couldn't beat her, and he couldn't expose her identity. Xia Fengliu was more than a little depressed. He was freezing in the water. Chapter 2963. He was almost frozen in the water, but after Huang Qingliu held his arm, his blood vessels that had almost stagnated started to flow again. It was as if there was a warm cover around his body, isolating him from the cold seawater. He couldn't help but look back at Ji Xinyu. She had been following behind them. Although her face was pale from the cold, her movements were still clean and neat, not lagging behind at all. His senior sister was indeed the strongest. Logically speaking, this sea was not suitable for women to come down, but she had come down and swam better than him. She made him, a man, pale in comparison. Senior sister, why did such a good senior sister like someone else? He was the one who had been by her side the longest. Xia Fengliu's eyes flashed with pain. "Do you really like her that much?" Huang Qingliu asked again. "It has nothing to do with you." "Indeed, it has nothing to do with me." Huang Qingliu chuckled. "But I also know that girls like men who are stronger than them, who can save them in times of crisis. Not someone whose martial arts are not as good as hers, who only knows how to call her senior sister and even needs her to take care of him." Xia Fengliu gritted his teeth. "I've only been practicing martial arts for a short time. If I cultivate for another 3,000 to 5,000 years, I won't be worse than Rongyue Tianlan. The problem is, will she wait for you for 3,000 to 5,000 years? What's more, after 3,000 to 5,000 years, when you improve, they will also improve. Their aptitude is also the best. You will never catch up with them through normal channels. It's better to awaken. You might still have hope." Xia Fengliu clenched his fists tightly. After a while, he said, "Don't even think about it. You're just trying to make me into another person. Let me tell you, don't even think about it." My senior sister once said that we should do everything openly. I want to improve myself openly. I am Xia Fenglu, not anyone else. Huang Qinglu glanced at him sideways. His gaze was like the light of the icy sea, dark and deep. Xia Fenglu felt an inexplicable chill. He looked at him warily. What are you up to now? Huang Qinglu smiled. What kind of bad ideas can I have? Let's go and pick the pearls to send your master off. He dragged him and continued to swim forward. Ji Xinyue looked calm on the surface, but in fact, she had been secretly observing Huang Qinglu. She had a feeling that this person had a strong background and was very mysterious. Ji Xinyue knew that there were people like hermits in this world. Some people didn't like to be in the limelight and preferred to blend in with the crowd. Therefore, even if they had super strong martial arts, they were still unknown in Jianghu. Therefore, when she first saw Huang Qinglu, she was not very surprised when she knew that he was an expert but not famous. He thought that he was also an otherworldly expert. She became friends with Xia Fenglu by accident and fell in love with him at first sight. That was why she entered the world and followed Xia Fenglu. Moreover, he was really good to Xia Fenglu. Xia Fenglu often gave him attitude, but he still had no complaints. Seeing how well Huang Qinglu treated Xia Fenglu, Ji Xinyue was even a little touched. After all, this junior brother of his was once an orphan, and what he lacked the most was love. Other than being worried that her master would sweep them away, Ji Xinyue was also very happy for her junior apprentice brother that someone was sincerely treating him well. This Huang Qinglu seemed to be slightly hostile towards her, and Ji Xinyue also expressed her understanding. If this person truly liked Xia Fenglu, he would naturally dislike her and be jealous of her. Chapter 2964. These were all actions that lovers should do, so Ji Xinyue did not take it to heart. When Huang Qinglu ignored Xia Fenglu's struggle and forcefully brought him forward, Ji Xinyue felt touched and amused at first. But as she watched, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. This Huang Qinglu was indeed very good to Xia Fenglu, but Xia Fenglu was obviously unwilling this time, but was forced to move forward by Huang Qinglu. Although her junior brother usually did things carelessly, he was not a narrow-minded person, nor was he an awkward person. But now, Ji Xinyue felt that her junior brother seemed to have something that was hard to say, as if he was being held hostage. She looked at Huang Qinglu's swimming posture again. In such a cold sea, he swam freely and casually, as if he was a native of this place, and the deep sea was his hometown. This place was deserted, and even birds could not fly here, so it was impossible for there to be a native. If there were, they should not be humans. Of course, on this continent, immortals and devils coexisted, and there were many races that were not human. For example, the Demon Clan, the Devil Clan, the Sharkmen Clan, and the Snake Clan. However, these races were few in number and could not form a true scale, so they usually hid in barren mountains and unruly rivers. There were also those who hid their auras and lived in the human world. Although this sea was beautiful, it should be considered a dangerous place. Could it be that this Huang Qinglu was from the Sharkmen Clan or the Demon Clan? No, the people of the Demon Clan had more or less demon qi on their bodies. After these people became stronger, although they could hide their demon qi, they could only hide it from the eyes of ordinary people. They could not hide it from the eyes of an immortal like Ji Xinyue. This Huang Qinglu did not have any demon qi or devil qi on his body, so he should not be from the Demon Clan or the Demon Clan. Could it be that he was from the Sharkmen Clan? The Sharkmen Clan had a beautiful appearance and a gentle nature, and were indeed somewhat similar to Huang Qinglu. Ji Xinyue was not a person who easily trusted people. She was also on guard against this Huang Qinglu at the beginning, but when she asked Xia Fenglu in private a few times, Xia Fenglu stammered, and only told her not to pay attention to this person. He did not say anything bad about this person, and even worked with this Huang Qinglu a few times, unknowingly trusted this person. This made Ji Xinyu's wariness towards him gradually disappear, and even treated him as Xia Fengliu's family. But now, she felt that something was wrong. She swam forward, trying to catch up and keep abreast of them. Huang Qinglu suddenly turned around and glanced at her. The corners of her lips curled up into a smile. This smile had a deep meaning. In this deep blue water, there was a strange feeling. Ji Xinyu felt a chill in her heart. She paused for a moment, her fingers gripping the hilt of her dagger tightly. Almost at the same time, the seawater around Ji Xinyu suddenly surged, and a pitch-black whirlpool appeared beside her. This whirlpool appeared too suddenly, and Ji Xinyue was not prepared for it. She was immediately sucked into the whirlpool, and her body involuntarily turned and was pulled into the whirlpool. The suction force of this whirlpool was extremely strong. Ji Xinyu felt as if she had fallen into a huge roller, and was being madly rotated by the whirlpool. The sound of water splashing filled her ears. She could only faintly hear Xia Fenglu shouting, "Senior sister." After all, they were in the water, and Xia Fenglu was not a good swimmer. If he had only used his voice, it would have been better. But when he shouted in a hurry, just as the shout rushed out of his throat, he was gulped down a large mouthful of seawater. He choked until his mind was muddled, and he almost fainted. He opened his mouth to cough, but suddenly, something soft blocked his lips, and a fresh breath entered his mouth. Chapter 2965. He opened his mouth and was about to cough when he felt something soft on his lips. A fresh breath entered his mouth. At the same time, he felt his arms tighten as he was trapped in Huang Qingliu's arms. He could not move at all. This breath was the breath of life. Xia Fenglu finally caught his breath. Shouting in the water, "Are you an idiot?" Huang Qingliu's voice rang in Xia Fengliu's ears. Xia Fenglu still ignored him. He desperately looked back at the whirlpool. Ji Xinyue's petite body was spinning in the whirlpool. She seemed to be struggling with all her might, but she could not break free from the whirlpool's power. Where did the whirlpool in the deep sea lead to? It might even lead to hell. If Ji Xinyue was completely sucked in, she would probably die. Xia Fengliu's eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed Huang Qingliu's sleeve. Where did this whirlpool come from? Save her. Save her. Huang Qinglu also glanced back and said indifferently, "She can't be saved." He pulled Xia Fenglu and continued to swim forward. Xia Fenglu panicked and said angrily, "You coward, if you don't save her, I will." He wanted to slap Huang Qinglu away and fight for his life. Huang Qinglu flicked his finger and a blue light enveloped Xia Fenglu. "Don't be rash. No one can escape from this demonic whirlpool. Aren't you going to collect clam pearls? It will be too late if you delay any longer." After being enveloped by the blue light, Xia Fengliu's entire body stiffened. He glared at him and said word by word, "I don't like clam pearls. I only want to save my senior sister. If anything happens to her, I will not let you off easily." Huang Qinglu narrowed his eyes and suddenly smiled. "With your current martial arts, how can you punish me?" Xia Fenglu was speechless. He clenched his fists, his nails almost digging into his flesh. You. He looked as if he wanted to swallow Huang Qinglu whole. Huang Qinglu said slowly, "Only the strong have the right to protect the people around them. Only the strong have the right to punish others. Young master, do you still not want to awaken? Do you still want to be Xia Fenglu?" Xia Fengliu's handsome face turned green and white. When his anger reached its peak, he calmed down. "Huang Qinglu, you made this whirlpool, right? You want to use this to stimulate me to awaken and become your young lord, right? Then let me tell you, if anything happens to my senior sister, I will immediately self-destruct. I'll make you lose everything. Huang Qinglu. His expression changed slightly as he clenched his fists tightly. Xia Fenglu glared at him fiercely and quietly held his breath. This was the only way he could threaten him. Huang Qingliu's gaze suddenly turned to look behind him, a trace of surprise flashing across her eyes as she slowly said, "There's no need to save him." Xia Fengliu's heart sank. He thought that something bad had happened to his senior sister. He turned around in fear and his eyes widened. Ji Xinyu, who had been sucked into the whirlpool, was actually spinning in the opposite direction, and was about to break free from the huge whirlpool. Senior sister. Xia Fenglu held his breath, his eyes shining. Senior sister was actually able to break free from this kind of whirlpool by herself. She was indeed the strongest. Just as Ji Xinyu was about to rush out of the whirlpool, she let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she had learned how to escape from the whirlpool from the mysterious person. Otherwise, she would have lost her life in this deep sea. She pursed her lips and secretly made a hand seal. Once she was out of danger, she would immediately deal with Huang Qinglu. This time, he was definitely behind this. Chapter 2966. She had to save her junior brother first. The tearing force of the whirlpool was getting weaker and weaker. Just as she was about to take advantage of the situation to jump out, her sleeves suddenly moved. With a swoosh, a white light escaped from her sleeves and flew towards the whirlpool. Moon God's sword. She didn't expect it to slip out at this time. Ji Xinyu didn't catch it and watched it fall into the whirlpool. After a few rounds, it disappeared. Ji Xinyu, wasn't this a divine sword? Wasn't it a divine sword with many extraordinary abilities? How could a whirlpool suck it away? With its ability, it should be able to escape by itself, right? Ji Xinyu only thought of it for a moment. She still had more important things to think about. The moment she escaped, she directly pounced towards Huang Qinglu. Let him go. Although she didn't know what Huang Qingliu's goal was, he frequently restrained Xia Fenglu and made things difficult for her. This proved that he didn't have good intentions. Her junior brother couldn't be threatened by others. Ji Xinyu's water was not bad. This pounce was the essence of all her martial arts. The azure saber in her hand emitted a dazzling light and slashed towards Huang Qinglu. Huang Qinglu didn't expect her to attack so quickly. He dragged Xia Fenglu and retreated like a whirlwind, avoiding her killing move. What is the meaning of this, Princess Xinyu? Ji Xinyu sneered, stop pretending to be innocent. Her figure flashed and she pounced again. Huang Qinglu dragged Xia Fenglu and dodged several of her killing moves. Once Ji Xinyu attacked, she was absolutely ruthless and without hesitation. Moreover, being in the water didn't affect her performance at all. After all, Huang Qinglu was dragging someone and this person was very uncooperative, so he was forced into a corner. After a dozen or so moves, half of his sleeve was cut off by the large saber in her hand. If he didn't dodge quickly, half of his arm would have been cut off by her. Such a delicate-looking girl actually attacked so fiercely. Huang Qinglu was forced to retreat continuously. In the end, he had no choice but to push Xia Fenglu in her direction. Forget it, I'll give him to you. Ji Xinyu was about to swing her saber at him, but when she saw this, she hurriedly retracted her saber and followed up with Xia Fenglu. Huang Qingliu's push was a little heavy, and the force of Xia Fengliu's charge was not small. Although Ji Xinyu caught him, she was still pushed back a few steps, and almost fell into the vortex again. Xia Fengliu's face was extremely pale. Trapped in the thin blue shell, his limbs seemed to have frozen. Ji Shinyu secretly gritted her teeth. Her junior brother was indeed trapped. To think that she had thought that they were just a couple quarreling, she raised her hand and broke the shell for him. Then, she unsealed his sealed acupoints and pulled him behind her. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Huang Qinglu, who was floating in front of her. "Who are you? What is the purpose of tricking us here?" Huang Qinglu rubbed her chin and looked at her. "I don't understand what you're saying. You're clearly here to pick pearls, aren't you? We just met by chance." Ji Shinyu sneered. "You were the one who told Little Nine about the moonlight clams here, right? You knew that he was worried about preparing a new gift, so when you talked to him, you seemed to have accidentally told him about it. You knew that he would be interested, so you rushed over in advance to wait for us, didn't you?" Huang Qinglu smiled. "You're really smart." Chapter 2967. Huang Qinglu smiled. "You are indeed smart." This sentence indirectly acknowledged Ji Shinyu's words. Ji Shinyu clenched the saber in her hand. Purpose. Huang Qinglu lowered his eyes slightly, and when he raised them again, there seemed to be a light flickering in the depths of his eyes as he looked behind Ji Shinyu. Him. Xie Juk. Ji Shinyu was startled, her eyebrows raised. What? Before she could finish her sentence, she suddenly felt a chill on her back and a sharp pain. Her body stiffened as she looked down at the tip of the saber sticking out of her chest. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She turned her head with difficulty and looked at Xie Fengliu, who had stabbed her. "You, why?" Xie Fengliu's face was pale, but his eyes were as deep as a whirlpool. He did not answer Ji Shinyu's question, but directly gave her a palm. Ji Shinyu involuntarily rushed forward, and in front of her, Huang Qinglu held a blue snake-shaped sword in his hand. The tip of the sword pointed directly at Ji Shinyu. Ji Shinyu's charge was towards the tip of his sword, as if she was sending herself to be killed. Huang Qinglu smiled at Ji Shinyu, waiting for her fatal collision. After all, Ji Shinyu had grown up in the wind and waves. Although she was shocked by Xie Fengliu's sneak attack, it had become a conditioned reflex to save herself from danger. Before her brain could react, her hands and feet had already taken action. The azure saber in her hand suddenly appeared, and the tip of the saber stabbed towards Huang Qinglu. Her saber was long, his sword was short. If he did not dodge, she would be the one to stab him first. She still profited. Huang Qinglu did not expect her to use such a suicidal attack when she was in a panic, but this kind of attack was the most effective. He could only dodge, then waved his hand, and an undercurrent suddenly rose in front of him. That undercurrent turned into a torrential waterfall in the blink of an eye, like an angry water dragon, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws towards Ji Shinyu. After all, Ji Shinyu was seriously injured, and the pain of raising her hand just now almost made her faint. Seeing the huge torrent rushing towards her, she only had time to set up a small barrier around her, and her whole body was sucked into the torrent. This stream of water was extremely strange, it actually froze into ice in an instant. Ji Shinyu was sealed in this ice, falling towards the whirlpool that was still spinning. In her daze, she seemed to see Xie Fengliu rushing towards her with a pale face. However, before he could reach her, he was stopped by Huang Qinglu. Then, the ice coffin that was binding her was sucked into the whirlpool. All she could see was a deep blue, and she could no longer see anything else. Xie Fengliu watched helplessly as the ice coffin wrapped around Ji Shinyu and sank into the whirlpool. Her body was still bleeding, and the ice coffin that trapped her was dyed scarlet. With her eyes wide open, she disappeared before his eyes just like that. Like a madman, he sent a palm strike towards Huang Qinglu. "Bastard, you killed her. You killed her." Huang Qinglu took a step back and quickly clamped down on his hand. That pair of eyes that always had a smile in them were now filled with ridicule. "Young master, it was you who did it. It was you who used evil arts to control me. Xia Fenglu was so angry that not only was his body trembling, even his voice was trembling. Huang Qinglu looked at him with a smile, and the words he said were incomparably cruel. In her eyes, it was you who plotted against her, and stabbed her with a sword. Xia Fenglu looked at the shiny dagger in his hand. The dagger was still stained with her blood, and even his fingers were stained with her blood. Chapter 2968. He suddenly raised his left hand and chopped at his right hand that was holding the sword. Huang Qingliu's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He quickly restrained him and sealed his acupuncture point so that he could no longer harm himself. Even if you cut yourself into pieces, it's already done. It's useless. Huang Qingliu's voice was indifferent and cold. Xia Fengliu's entire body was trembling. He closed his eyes and suddenly sneered, "I'll go accompany her. If you have the ability, seal my acupuncture points for the rest of my life. Otherwise, as long as I release it, I'll go accompany her." It was easy to stop a person from committing suicide, but difficult to stop a person from committing suicide for the rest of their life. If a person had the intention to commit suicide, they would find an opportunity sooner or later. Since he had killed his senior sister, then he would pay with his life for her. A debt of blood must be paid with blood, there was no need to hesitate. Huang Qinglu looked at him for a moment, as if to confirm the truth of his words. Xia Fengliu's eyes were bloodshot as he coldly looked at him, his thin lips tightly pursed. Huang Qinglu finally sighed, "I won't seal your acupuncture points for the rest of your life. I'll release it for you now. But before I release it, I have to tell you something. Ji Shenyu is not dead. If you die, then she will truly die." After saying this, he really did release Xia Fengliu's acupuncture points. He knew that with this sentence, Xia Fenglu would definitely not commit suicide again. Xia Fenglu really did not commit suicide. He stared at him, "I don't believe it." Although he had been controlled to attack just now, he still had his own consciousness. He knew that although his sword did not pierce through her heart, it still pierced an important organ. She was also sealed in the ice coffin and could not stop the bleeding, so she would definitely die. Huang Qinglu only said this to dispel his thoughts of suicide. Huang Qinglu did not argue with him. He raised his hand and the seawater in front of him condensed into a water mirror, and a scene appeared in the water mirror. At the bottom of the sea that looked like blue crystals, there was a similarly blue ice coffin stuck in those crystals. Inside the ice coffin, Ji Shenyu's eyes were slightly closed and she was motionless. Her wounds were no longer bleeding, she's dead. She's clearly dead. Even her wounds are not bleeding. Xia Fengliu's fingertips were trembling. No, she's not dead. The reason why her wounds are no longer bleeding is because I used the ice seal technique to seal her wounds. Huang Qingliu's voice was methodical. She can live for another 10 days. If she can't be saved after 10 days, she will be completely dead, and her soul will be scattered. If you want to save her, there is only one way. Awakening. After the awakening, your power will be completely restored. At that time, saving her will be as easy as blowing off dust. Xia Fenglu was speechless. There are only two paths in front of you. You can either awaken and save her, or you can accompany her when she dies. Which one do you choose? Huang Qinglu looked at him with a smile, giving him a cruel choice. Xia Fenglu closed his eyes. After a while, he opened his eyes. His gaze was cold. "I choose to awaken. What should we do?" Huang Qinglu seemed to be relieved of a heavy burden. "Very good, come with me." Xia Fenglu didn't move. "Are you sure there's still time?" Huang Qinglu naturally understood what he was referring to. He nodded slightly. If you move quickly, there's still time. Xia Fenglu closed his eyes. His voice was as cold as ice. After I awaken, if I can't save her in time, Wang Qinglu, I'll make you beg for death. You'll suffer forever. Wang Qinglu froze. He looked at him for a while and finally sighed. All right. Chapter 2969. He raised his sleeve, and a ray of blue light shot toward the bottom of the sea. What are you doing? Xia Fenglu looked at him coldly. I'm giving her another layer of protection. Huang Qinglu smiled, but her smile was a little thin. A complicated emotion flashed through her eyes. Actually, I cherish my life too. She dragged him away. Xia Fenglu realized that they were going in the wrong direction. Where are we going? Shouldn't we go out to sea immediately? Huang Qinglu didn't even turn her head. We're going to pick pearls. Isn't that what you've always wanted? I don't want that. I just want to save my senior sister now. Xia Fenglu was full of anger. If this bastard hadn't coaxed him with the moonlight clam's pearl, he and his senior sister wouldn't have ended up in this situation. Huang Qinglu only said, there's still time. She continued to swim forward quickly with him. Xia Fenglu was speechless. The dark bottom of the sea, the deep blue sea, at a glance, it was a stretch of deep blue. In the depths of the sea, a young girl covered in blood was crawling with difficulty. Blood meandered all the way. Her black hair covered her face, making it impossible to see her face clearly. However, her figure was unusually familiar. Gu. With a splash, the young girl slowly raised her head. Her black hair parted to the side, revealing a palm-sized face. Her pale and bloodless face hit his heart at this moment. Xinyu. Rongyu Yishanlin couldn't help but call out. He suddenly opened his eyes. The deep sea and the young girl were nowhere to be seen. The surroundings were silent and dark. He was still sitting on the bed. In the black veil of the night, he could clearly see the simple and elegant furnishings in the room. He was still meditating in the quiet room. What happened just now was just a dream. Rongyu Yishanlin raised his hand and pressed on his rapidly beating heart. In such a cold place, his forehead was sweating, and even his palms were wet. He actually had a nightmare. He was obviously meditating. He had never meditated until he fell asleep, let alone had a nightmare. He looked out of the window. The sky was still dark outside. A few stars hung in the sky, looking a little lonely. His heart was still beating wildly, as if he was still panicking just now. The scene from the dream flashed through his mind, and he tapped the space between his eyebrows with his finger. He actually had such a dream. The girl in the dream looked like Ji Yu at first, but when she raised her head, she became Ji Xinyu. He even dreamed that she was in great danger, crawling helplessly at the bottom of the sea. Was he overthinking things recently? Or is it that what you think about during the day, you dream about it at night? Or was it a warning? Was she really in danger? Impossible, right? She had already obtained the divine sword and should be returning to the Purple Cloud sect at this moment. Why did she go to the bottom of the sea to explore? Or perhaps it was just an unimportant nightmare. Moreover, this dream was so strange that the girl in the dream was actually the fusion of Ji Yu and Ji Xinyue. Could it be that he was hoping that they were the same person? He looked out at the sky again. It was said that a dream at this time was a warning. Could it be that Ji Xinyue was really in danger? His heart started to beat rapidly again, as if he was getting more and more panicked. The last scene of the dream surfaced in his mind again. The girl raised her head, her bloodless red lips slightly opened, as if she was asking for help. Save me, Rongyu Yishanlin couldn't hold it in anymore. He suddenly stood up and strode out of the door. He looked up at the sky with a few stars. He stretched out his palm, and a light blue voice transmission talisman appeared in his palm. He began to try to connect. Chapter 2970. There was no movement from the other side, and there was no intention of picking up. He tried several times, but there was no response from the other party. At this time, they were usually in deep sleep. Even if the sound transmission talisman lit up, they might not discover it. This was a very normal thing. Although he comforted himself in his heart, he was still panicking. After thinking for a while, he took out a blood-red sound transmission talisman and tried to pick it up. This sound transmission talisman was specially made by Rongyu Ishinlin. There were only 2 of them, and they could only be connected to each other, not to others. This one was in his hands, and the other should be in Ji Xinyue's storage space. He had secretly placed it in her storage space, hidden in a small corner. As long as Ji Xinyue did not turn her storage space upside down, this sound transmission talisman would not be found. He had secretly placed such a sound transmission talisman on her not to spy on her, but because this girl liked to take risks and did not like to be tied down. She did not even like to ask for help. According to her master, whenever she went out on an adventure, she would turn off all the sound transmission talismans on her, not leaving a single one behind. This often made people worried. Therefore, after Rongyu Ishinlin and her adventure in the tunnel, he secretly hid the blood-red sound transmission talisman in her storage space, preparing to use it in an emergency. This blood-red sound transmission talisman had 2 special functions. Once it was used, the sound waves would sound in the other party's mind. No matter what situation the other party was in, they would be able to receive it. Secondly, it had a positioning function. Once it was connected, it could slowly determine the other party's position, allowing him to quickly find her. This special sound transmission talisman was invented by Shinjioli. After this emperor invented it, he kept one with him in case of an accident. That day, when the Dizun met with great danger in the land of flames, he connected to this sound transmission talisman and woke him up from his sweet dream. Then, he rushed over to save people like the wind. Rongyu Ishinlin liked to concoct rare things, so he naturally copied the Dizun's sound transmission talisman with great interest. This kind of sound transmitting talisman required blood essence to refine. Refining one would consume 100 years of his cultivation, so he could only make 2 copies. Because he couldn't find anyone worthy of giving them to, they had been left to rot in his storage space. It was only when he was with Ji Xinyu that he suddenly had an epiphany and gifted her one. Of course, Rongyu Tianlan wouldn't use this voice transmission talisman so easily. He didn't want that little girl to think that he was spying on her. After Rongyu Ishinlin and Ji Xinyue had interacted with each other for a period of time, they also exchanged ordinary sound transmission talismans. Rongyu Tian had tried to contact her a few times. Not bad, she picked up at that time. She was a generous lady and treated him the same way she would treat an ordinary friend. Therefore, if it wasn't for some special reason, she wouldn't have ignored his voice transmission. The blood-red voice transmission talisman flashed in his palm. Rongyu Tian was still a little nervous. It was really unwise to expose the existence of the voice-transmitting spell because of a nightmare. If Shinjioli knew about it, he would probably say that his IQ was plummeting. He pursed his lips and stared at the blood-red voice transmission talisman, waiting for it to light up. However, after a long while, the blood-red sound transmission talisman remained the same as when it had first been taken out. It only flashed with a faint light and showed no signs of being connected. Chapter 2971. Rongyu Ishinlin's face turned pale. If the other party was just sleeping or was in the middle of some adventure, she would not pick up the ordinary sound-transmitting talisman. However, this kind of blood-red sound-transmitting talisman could definitely wake the other party up from their sleep. As long as she had the intention to pick up the call, this sound-transmitting talisman would automatically connect. Therefore, there was no reason for it not to connect. Unless Ji Xinyuan knew about this sound-transmitting talisman in advance, and she needed to focus all her energy on the battle. She could not afford to be distracted for even a moment. Therefore, even if the sound waves of this sound-transmitting talisman directly entered her mind, she would reject it immediately. However, was this possible? With Ji Xinyuan's character, she should have quickly picked up the call and at least figured out the origin of this sound-transmitting talisman. That was not right. Ji Xinyuan was very straightforward. If she found out about this sound-transmitting talisman in advance, she would most likely throw it away or simply pick up the call to see who was behind it. Could it be that she had really thrown it away? Perhaps she was in a coma, or perhaps she was already dead. Rongyu Ishanlan's fingers were already cold. She quickly sensed the location of the sound-transmitting talisman and vaguely felt a bone-chilling cold. This sound-transmitting talisman was in the extremely cold land of the extreme north. Rongyu Ishanlan thought of that dream again. In the dream, it was as dark as the bottom of the sea with ice crystals. There was only one such sea in the Fanning continent, the Tianjing Sea. Whether she threw away this sound-transmitting talisman or not, it was unusual for it to appear there. Why would she go to such a desolate place for no reason? Could it be that she was going to pick moonlight clam pearls? Rongyu Ishanlan was also an adventurous person. He had been there more than 3,000 years ago and even picked a moonlight clam pearl. However, he was not interested in anything. After playing with it for a while, he gave it away casually. Because he had been there, he knew how dangerous that place was. That sea was the most unpredictable place in the Fanning continent. It was also the coldest place. There were man-eating sharks and undercurrents in the sea. It was very easy to kill. This girl did not want her life. Rongyu Ishanlan's figure flashed and flew directly into the sky. Because he was too anxious, he naturally did not use the ordinary flight technique. Instead, he directly used the teleportation technique that consumed a lot of telekinesis. The place he had set off from was the southern continent, where the mountains were warm and the water was soft. His destination was the extreme north, which spanned almost the entire Sanskrit continent, spanning tens of thousands of miles. With Rongyu Tianlan's skills and techniques, it took her more than half a day to reach Tianjing Sea. When he finally appeared above the celestial crystal ocean, it was already noon. Unfortunately, he had appeared at a time when the blizzard was raging. Snowflakes the size of plates were swept up by the hurricane and smashed fiercely onto his body. Waves that were several feet high rose from the sea and slammed onto the icebergs, smashing them into pieces. Bone-chilling cold. After Rongyu Tianlan appeared here, she realized that she had made a very serious mistake. Because he had rushed over from the south, he was only wearing a very cool thin robe. In addition, he had consumed a lot of psyche power, so the yang qi in his body was not enough. At this moment, when the cold wind blew and the snowflakes hit him, the chill penetrated his bones and made his hair stand on end. He cursed under his breath and used his psyche power to protect his body. Only then did he not get frozen by the sudden cold air. He quickly looked around and did not see anyone's figure, not even a living thing. He once again sensed the location of the sound-transmitting talisman, then looked at the sea under his feet. His eyebrows twitched. The sound-transmitting talisman was at the bottom of the sea. Chapter 2972. He stood there for a moment, then gritted his teeth and jumped into the water with a splash. Rongyu Ishanlan felt that if Shinjuli knew about this, he would probably give him the title of #1 idiot in the world. For an illusory nightmare, for a person he couldn't contact at the moment, he had driven tens of thousands of miles and jumped directly into the ice sea purgatory. And the result of this was that he would most likely find an abandoned sound-transmitting talisman. At this time, it was already more than half a day after the pearl harvesting time. Regardless of whether the pearl harvesting was successful or not, she shouldn't have stayed at the bottom of the sea. If nothing happened to her, the sound-transmitting talisman that he had spent so much effort on was most likely abandoned by her in the deep sea. The seawater here was different from other places. It wouldn't freeze even if it was dozens of degrees below zero. If he didn't make any preparations, as long as he came into contact with the water's surface, he would be frozen into a lump of ice. Rongyu Ishanlin didn't want to go down a second time. If the sound-transmitting talisman was simply discarded by the girl, his action of jumping down was simply too stupid. Rongyu Ishanlin often boasted that he was a rare smart person and would never do anything stupid in his life. But this time, he did it, and he was quite willing to do it. Fortunately, he could sense the sound-transmitting talisman and could determine its general location. Otherwise, he might not be able to find a peanut-sized sound-transmitting talisman in the vast sea even if he searched here for a year. Rongyu Ishanlin was an excellent swimmer and had a protective layer on his body. Even so, when he swam in the water, he still had goosebumps. He cursed under his breath again. This was really not a place for humans, and he quickly swam forward in the water. During this process, he didn't give up and used 2 sound-transmitting talismans to contact Ji Xinyue, but there was still no response. He even felt that the place where the blood-red sound-transmitting talisman was even colder. The coldness penetrated his heart through his senses, causing his heart to tighten. Could it be that something really happened to her in these waters? With her martial arts, it shouldn't be, right? Although it was dangerous here, it shouldn't cause any fatal injuries to her. In such cold seawater, a person could only stay in it for a day at most. More than a day would cause permanent damage. That girl should be aware of this, so the possibility of her being fine at the bottom of the sea was almost zero. Rongyu Ishanlin secretly clenched his fists. He would rather be an idiot and come here in vain and only get a sound-transmitting talisman than see her dead body at the bottom of the sea, the sound-transmitting talisman at his waist suddenly. When Rongyu Ishanlin saw it, he was stunned. Could it be that she finally remembered to reply? His hand trembled as he pulled out the voice transmission talisman. Then, his heart sank. The moon divine sword was. It's that s left a's, ss it ru, s, it, s, it's, s, it of moon of the of moon, t, s ones of it moon, teat, ofs, s of. With its divine power, it was naturally able to escape the power of the whirlpool and jump back up. But it was a little disappointed. It was such a rare divine sword, anyone who got their hands on it should have treated it like a treasure. Chapter 2973. It was such a rare divine sword that anyone who got their hands on it would treat it like a treasure. It felt that it had been sucked into the whirlpool, and its master would try to salvage it regardless of the cost. For example, at the moment when it fell into the water, if its master really cared about it, she would try her best to catch it in her hands, but, no. Master only tried to grab it, but after she failed to catch it, she ignored it. It was as if it was not a sword that was sucked into the whirlpool, but an insignificant piece of iron. If it was her broken sword that fell down, she would definitely try her best to salvage it, right? The moon god sword's self-esteem was hurt again. It was a little upset at the bottom of the sea, so it did not want to go up. So, it just lay there. Subconsciously, it wanted to wait and see if its master would come to salvage it. It even cut off the telepathic connection between it and its master. It did not want its master to use a normal summoning spell to summon it. How embarrassing it would be if it returned to its master's side. It would not be in line with its noble style as a divine sword. It waited for almost an hour. The moon god's sword calculated that its master should have gotten the moonlight pearl by this time, and should have the time to come and salvage it. However, it waited anxiously for so long, but there was still no sign of its master. Wasn't she taking it too lightly? It even caught so many fish for her. Wait a little longer. She really did not want it anymore. She gave up just like that. She was too quick to burn the bridge after crossing the river. No, she had not crossed the river yet. After all, it had not done what she wanted it to do. The more it waited, the angrier it became. The more it waited, the more uncomfortable it felt. Finally, it could not help but activate the telepathic connection between it and its master. It felt that its master could not find it, so it gave her a chance to find it. However, after this spell was activated, it immediately felt that something was wrong. Master's condition was not right. She was very weak. It even smelled a unique bloody smell that belonged to its master. Master was in danger. Her life was in danger. The moon god's sword directly jumped up from the bottom of the sea. While following its master's aura, it quickly flew in that direction. It didn't smell any great danger in this sea, so how could its master be in danger? Who could hurt her? Sure enough, when it wasn't by her side, something would happen to her. Very quickly, the moon god's sword saw the enormous coffin-like ice shell at the bottom of the sea, and saw its master who was sealed inside and didn't know whether he was dead or alive. The moment it saw this, the moon god's sword was enraged. Master wasn't bitten by a monster, he was stabbed by a dagger. There was a ghastly bloody hole in his chest and back. The moon god's sword was the ancestor of all weapons. It stuck to the ice shell and sensed for a moment. It could tell that its master's injury was caused by the dagger gifted by the hidden sword manor. It could even tell that the dagger was stabbed from her back. It was clearly a sneak attack. Both of her companions had the same dagger, but the one in Huang Qingliu's hand had a fishy smell. The moon god's sword's sense of touch was not ordinary. It quickly smelled that there was no fishy smell in Ji Xinyu's blood through the ice shell. This showed that the one who had plotted against her was someone else, her junior brother. He had been plotted against by the person he trusted the most. The moon god's sword was angry for Ji Xinyu. It circled around the ice shell. Chapter 2974. The moon god's sword was furious for Ji Xinyu. It circled around the ice shell and could faintly sense that its master was still alive. However, she was unconscious and should have fallen into a deep coma. This won't do. She would suffocate to death in this ice shell. The moon god's sword's body emitted a cold light. It wanted to split the ice shell and save its master. It knew that it had great strength and could easily split a mountain. Therefore, it had to be careful to avoid cutting its master in half. Instead of saving her, it killed her. For safety's sake, it stuck the tip of its sword on the ice shell and carefully rubbed against it. The ice shell was as smooth as before, not even a white mark was left on it. The moon god's sword was speechless. Its rubbing just now could even leave a hole in a diamond. How could this thin and brittle ice shell not move at all? The moon god's sword increased its strength and rubbed against it again. 6 hours passed, and the moon god's sword's blade flashed with light as it pierced down from above. The sharp sword tip pierced the ice shell, producing an ear-piercing sound. However, the ice shell only shook a little, and not even a small crack could be seen on it. In these 6 hours, it had used all kinds of methods, including horizontal slashes, vertical slashes, and stabs. It had already used all its methods and displayed all its power. However, it was still unable to cut open the ice shell at all. The moon god's sword was very angry. Its angry light caused the seawater in the area to churn, almost forming a huge whirlpool. During this period of time, a fearless man-eating shark broke in. It was attracted by the smell of blood emitted from the ice shell. It opened its mouth wide, wanting to bite the ice shell and drag out the bloody food inside. The moon god's sword had a belly full of anger and had nowhere to vent it. With a flash of its sword, it directly cut the man-eating shark into two halves. The blood of the man-eating shark attracted even more ferocious beasts in the sea. At first, they came one by one, but later on, they came in groups. The moon god's sword did not look at the species of these carnivorous beasts. If one came, it would kill one; if two came, it would kill a pair. When Rong Tianlan arrived, she was shocked by the scene in front of her. In the depths of the ocean, the water had already been dyed blood red. Countless corpses of ferocious beasts were floating in the water. From time to time, a cold sword light would shoot out. Every time it shot out, a ferocious beast would be killed. This entire sea was like a bloody slaughterhouse, which was a ghastly sight. Because the seawater was too bloody, it was impossible to see what was at the bottom. However, Rong Yishanlan still recognized the sword light of the moon god's sword. That swaying white light was like a bolt of lightning that split the red clouds. It was extremely dazzling. His first reaction was that Ji Xinyu had run into trouble underwater, and now she was trapped inside, using her divine sword to fight against these beasts. If the divine sword was here, then Ji Xinyu would definitely be here as well. He heaved a sigh of relief. It was good that they were still fighting. At least it proved that they were still alive. He rushed forward and was caught off guard by a beam of white light that shot straight at him. It was the light of the divine sword. Had she gone berserk? Xinyu, it's me. Rong Yuetian used the bamboo flute in her hand to block the white light and transmitted her voice. That beam of white light paused for a moment, then suddenly shrank back. Before Rong Yishanlan could heave a sigh of relief, he saw the divine sword jump out from the sea of blood. After killing so many ferocious beasts, the sword was actually not stained with a single drop of blood. The shiny tip of the sword could blind people's eyes. It was pointed at Rong Yishanlan with full vigilance, and a bone-piercing murderous aura rushed towards him. Chapter 2975. Rong Yishanlan's heart sank. This sword did not look like it was controlled by a human. Where was its owner? Could it be that in the depths of this sea of blood, he focused his vision and looked inside? He vaguely saw a white object, and within that white object, there was a person. The blood was too thick and he could not see clearly, but he subconsciously felt that the person should be Ji Xinyu. His figure flashed and he was about to pounce over. Buzz, the tip of the divine sword shot in front of him, blocking his way. The sword was full of hostility. Rong Yishanlan. Did this sword lose its mind? He said in a low voice, "Move aside, I am your master's friend. Let me see her." The moon god's sword did not back down. The brilliance on the tip of the sword flashed even more fiercely. It was obvious that it did not like the word friend. Rong Yishanlan sized up the sword's appearance and looked inside. His voice deepened. She was betrayed by her friend. The moon god's sword paused and the tip of the sword nodded. That was why friends were the most untrustworthy. The moon god's sword did not dare to believe that its master was only left with one breath. If another bad person came to plot against her, she would really be finished. Furthermore, if the one in front of it was a bad person, it would be even more difficult to deal with. It was not his opponent at all. Rong Yishanlan's hand was like a lotus flower as he grabbed the hilt of the moon god's sword. "Bring me to see her." This grab of his was very skillful, and just happened to restrain the moon god's sword. He took advantage of the momentum to rush forward, and finally reached the ice shell. Her surroundings were dyed red with blood, and she was frozen in that shell. Her face was as white as snow, and even her full lips had lost their color. Her long eyelashes were closed and her chest was not moving up and down. Only a bloody wound could be seen. Rongyu Ishanlan placed his hand on the ice shell. His handsome face was as dark as the cold sea and a storm seemed to have condensed around him. The moon god's sword swore that it had never seen a person with such a cold aura. Especially when this kind of aura came from this gentleman who had always been as gentle as jade and modest as he was. It made the moon god's sword, who had always been unruly, tremble. Because the smell of blood in this place was too strong, it would still attract a large number of carnivorous beasts from the sea. The moon god's sword could not kill them all, and it would only create a vicious cycle. Seeing that there were a few big fishes with white teeth swimming over from afar, the moon god's sword was about to jump out again but was stopped by Rongyu Tian. First, he used several purification talismans in the water, purifying the surrounding blood in the blink of an eye. Even the corpses of the ferocious beasts had been purified to some unknown place. Then he started to play the flute. Yushin's sword didn't think that a person could play a flute in the water, and he couldn't even hear what kind of strange sound he was playing. However, after watching him play for a while, the ferocious beasts that were rushing over suddenly seemed to have lost their target. They circled around nearby before turning around and leaving. The sea regained its previous tranquility, and even the seawater regained its deep blue color. This ascendant immortal was truly formidable. He was actually able to resolve the crisis with just a wave of his hand. The moon god's sword was actually very flustered. Although it was arrogant, it was still a sword that had just been born and didn't have much experience. It didn't know what to do when faced with Ji Xinyu's situation. It only wanted to get its master out of the ice shell, but it had been in vain. Now that it saw Rongyu Tian like this, it felt that it had finally found a backbone. Chapter 2976. It stood there and stared at Rongyu Tian's every move. Rongyu Tian was circling around the ice shell, and from time to time, he would reach out and knock on the ice shell, as if he thought he could break the ice shell. The moon god's sword disagreed. It was such a sharp divine sword, and even after using all its strength, it was still unable to break the ice shell. He wanted to break it with his fingers. How was that possible? Rongyu Tian circled around the ice shell for a moment, then suddenly stopped and reached out to the moon god's sword. Cut me. The moon god's sword was speechless. If it cut him, it would directly cut off his palm. Quick! Rongyu Tian was impatient. The moon god's sword did not know what he was trying to do, so it had no choice but to go up and cut his palm lightly. In the end, it did not even cut through his skin. Rongyu Tian frowned. Are you not full? Use more strength. So the moon god's sword used more strength. There was a big cut in Rongyu Tian's palm. If he had not used a spell to stop the bleeding in time, the blood that flowed out would have formed a river. He glanced at it, and the moon god's sword shrunk back guiltily. Rongyu Tian could not be bothered with it. He used his fingertips to dip in the blood from his palm, and quickly drew some talismans on the ice shell. A bright red talisman was inserted into the ice shell. His movements were indescribably fast, and the moon god's sword felt a little dazzled. After a moment, the ice shell that was stronger than a diamond shell made a fine cracking sound. Poof! The entire ice shell shattered, and Ji Xinyu, who was sealed inside, fell down. Rongyu Tian immediately held her in his arms. Her body was cold and soft, and there was no breath in his arms. Her face was as pale as a crystal, as if it would break with a pinch. Because he had destroyed the ice shell, blood gushed out from her wounds again. Rongyu Tian's black eyes seemed to be surging with anger, but he suppressed it. He hugged her tightly, and regardless of whether she could hear him or not, he said in her ear, "Xinyu, I'm here. I'll save you, don't be afraid." I'll be by your side. He hugged her tightly with one hand, while his other hand moved the blood talisman continuously. Specks of transparent light flew out from the shattered ice shell and flew into Ji Shinyu's body following Rongyue Tianlan's hand gestures. Ji Shinyu, who had already lost all signs of life, moved her finger slightly as these faint lights entered her body. Moon God's sword had been nervously waiting at the side, watching everything. Seeing her slightly moving fingertips was more exciting than seeing any other scene. It immediately jumped up and was about to rush over. However, he was pushed away by Rongyue Tian. You have a strong murderous aura, you will hurt her. Thus, the Moon God's sword hurriedly retreated. It was still very impressed with this high immortal in front of it. He had actually managed to break the ice shell with just a wave of his hand. It had struggled for a long time, but it still hadn't been able to break it. Although Rongyue Tian's handsome face was so heavy that it could drip water, his movements were smooth and fast, like moving clouds and flowing water. He first stopped the bleeding for her, then waved his hand to set up a transparent soft cover around her body. Then, he quickly rushed up with her in his arms. He didn't want to know how she had ended up in this state. He wanted to save her first. Fortunately, he had come in time. If he had come a day later, even if she didn't lose her life, she would have lost her skills forever and become an ordinary woman. This might not be a big deal to other women, but to Ji Shinyu, losing her skills was crueler than losing her life. Chapter 2977. He was very glad. He was glad that he was able to save her in time. The Moon God's sword hurriedly followed. When Rongyue Tian entered the sea, it was still windy and snowy outside, as if it was the end of the world. However, when he went out to sea, it was calm and peaceful. The old icebergs had disappeared, and new ones had formed. It was a world of glass. Naturally, it was extremely cold outside. The two of them were fine, but in Ji Shinyu's state of near death, this kind of cold could take her life. The thin cover he had placed on her could block water but not wind. Moreover, it broke the moment she came out of the water. In this state, she could not use the power of origin to protect her body, so Rongyue Tian opened his outer robe and wrapped her in his arms. His robe was too thin and did not have much of an effect on keeping her warm. Fortunately, his body was warm after he circulated his power, so she did not immediately freeze into a lump of ice in his arms. The Moon God's sword was stunned. Its master was like a baby in the arms of Supreme Deity Rongyue Tian, wrapped tightly in his loose outer robe. Not even a strand of hair was exposed. Did Supreme Deity Rongyue Tian have an inner robe on him? It seemed to have seen him only wearing such a thin outer robe. Quickly dig an ice cave, quick. Rongyue Tian circulated his power to warm the woman's body in his arms while instructing the Moon God's sword that was hanging there like a piece of wood. Although these icebergs were frozen harder than iron, they were not much of a problem for the Moon God's sword. After a while, it followed Rongyue Tian's instructions and dug a big hole in the icebergs, big enough for 4 to 5 people to lie inside. Rongyue Tian carried Ji Shinyu in, but the Moon God's sword was still puzzled. Why didn't he just carry her back to a warm place? Why did he have to stay here? Rongyue Tian naturally did not care about the Moon God's sword's doubts. After he entered the cave, he started to get busy. He pulled out a blanket from his storage space and covered Ji Shinyu with it to warm her up. Then, he started a fire in the ice cave, slowly increasing the temperature in the ice cave. The Moon God's sword was puzzled. If the temperature in the ice cave increased, wouldn't the ice cave melt? However, Rongyue Ishanlan had set up some kind of enchantment in the ice cave. In the raging bonfire, the temperature of the ice cave quickly rose, almost as warm as spring. However, the surrounding walls of the cave were still hard, as if they were made of bricks. The wounds on Ji Shinyu's chest and back needed to be treated in time. Rongyu Ishinlan caressed the blanket wrapped around Ji Xinyue, then looked at the sword hanging in the air. Get out. Moon God's sword, why should it go out? It wanted to see its master get better. It hung there as if it didn't understand. Rongyu Ishinlan's eyes flashed. This time, she used telepathy. I want to heal her. You can't watch. Get out first. The moon god's sword's body stiffened. He was not its master, but he could still communicate with it using a secret language. One had to know that once a divine sword like this recognized its master, it could only communicate with its master without any barriers. When it communicated with others, it mainly relied on gestures. Unfortunately, the moon god's sword was at Sundra, and it was too lazy to do so. It turned out that it could still communicate with this exalted immortal. The moon god's sword was no longer depressed and mute. It tried to send him a message. How can you communicate with me? Rongyu Ishinlan glanced at it and said very bluntly, I don't have time to talk nonsense with you now. Get out first. I'll save her first. I'll talk to you later. At the crucial moment, the moon god's sword was still very sensible. It finally flew out. Chapter 2978. However, before it flew out, it couldn't help but say something that it had wanted to say for a long time. Your quilt is really ugly. It's gray and doesn't have any sense of beauty. Rongyu Ishinlan was speechless. He couldn't be bothered with this ignorant sword. He gently opened up half of the quilt and wrapped it around her lower body, only exposing her injured upper body. She was wearing a blue diving suit. If it wasn't damaged, it would be warm enough. It seemed that she had made sufficient preparations for this trip. However, once it was damaged, it was equivalent to a rag, and all its functions were gone. If he wanted to treat her wounds, he had to get rid of the diving suit. Rongyu Ishinlan held her in his arms and tore off the rag on her upper body with one hand. Her pink skin was pale due to blood loss, but her figure was still very good. Whether it was her full breasts or her slender waist, the curve was extremely perfect. Rongyu Ishinlan naturally didn't have any thoughts at this time, but when he saw her body, his heart skipped a beat and his eyes narrowed slightly. She originally had a lot of scars on her body, but after Rongyu Ishinlan's treatment, most of those big and small scars had disappeared. Now, there were two more big ones. Rongyu Ishinlan secretly clenched his fists. No wonder she didn't care about the scars on her body and wasn't curious about the method he used to remove them. For someone who got injured so frequently, she really couldn't care less. Rongyu Ishinlan looked down at her thick and fine curly eyelashes. She looked very well behaved and obedient in her coma, making people want to dote on her. Who would have thought that such a beautiful girl would have such a strong heart? Fighting, drinking, upholding justice, none of them were lacking. She was good at everything, even better than men. How did Ning Xuema describe this kind of person? A tough woman. She had a real image. When Rongyu Ishinlan was watching the Almighty and Ning Xuema break up, he had thought about his other half and imagined his sweetheart. He had always thought that he liked the gentle, elegant, educated, and reasonable type, such as Yunxi. Or the lively, cute, and innocent kind, such as Ji Yu. He felt that the reason why there was no chemistry between him and Yunxi was because, firstly, he knew that she liked Shinjiuli. Secondly, he really didn't have any feelings for Yunxi. It didn't feel right. Only Ji Yu had truly moved his heart, but the one who had a grudge with Ji Yu was Yi Qianshang. It was just a wisp of his battle soul, but it wasn't the complete him. Now, he didn't expect that the person he liked was this tomboy, who looked like a delicate flower in front of him. She was the only one who could affect his emotions and make him feel the torture of not seeing her for a day felt like 3 years. Although the injuries on Ji Xinyu's chest and back were extremely dangerous, in front of Rongyu Tianlan, who could no longer be described as a godly doctor. Such injuries were nothing. Especially this kind of sword wound, he treated it even more skillfully, his movements as smooth as the clouds. He first took care of the things behind her. After he was done, he started to take care of the things in front of her. What she had suffered wasn't just a superficial wound. After all, there was a hole in her body, and the damage to her internal organs wasn't light. She needed him to perform some minor surgery on her to repair her internal organs as well. Of course, his repair wasn't a major surgery. Chapter 2979. Of course, he wasn't going to open her chest and perform a major surgery. Instead, he was going to use magic to force the injured parts of her body to heal automatically. This was also a delicate job, and he couldn't afford to be distracted. Usually, Romeo Tianlan would have an easy time performing this kind of surgery, but today, he couldn't relax. This was because his beloved woman was under his palm. What was worse was that he had to press his palm on her chest during the operation, which was to the left of her tall and beautiful peak. Even Romeo Tianlan, who was used to seeing the world, felt a little uneasy. He took a few deep breaths before he calmed down and suppressed the restlessness in his heart. Just as he was about to circulate his power, the delicate body under his palm suddenly moved. Romeo Tianlan's attention was originally on her wound, but when she moved, he seemed to have realized something. He raised his head to look at her face, and then met her beautiful slightly opened eyes. Their eyes met. Romeo Tianlan's hand trembled. She actually woke up at this time. Romeo Tianlan's hands and feet acted before his brain, and he raised his hand to hit her sleeping acupoint. Therefore, Ji Xinhue, who had just regained consciousness and hadn't seen the person in front of her clearly, fell into a deep sleep again. Romeo Tianlan calmed down, looked at his hand, then looked at Ji Xinhue, who had closed her eyes again, and sighed slightly. Well, this kind of surgery required the patient's absolute cooperation, and sleeping was the best way to cooperate. Therefore, he hit her acupoint to give her better treatment, and not because he felt guilty. In fact, he was overthinking. At this time, although Ji Xinhue opened her eyes, she wasn't really awake, it was just a conditioned reflex. Time passed by, and the damaged organs in Ji Xinhue's body finally slowly glued back together. This kind of gluing was the same as a wound stitched by a surgeon. In order for it to completely heal, she still needed to cooperate with his telekinesis after she woke up. This kind of connection consumed a lot of telekinesis, not to mention that Romeo Tianlan had been continuously using his telekinesis. After this surgery, he was sweating profusely, and his whole body was weak. He lowered his head to look at the person who had been sleeping, and her complexion looked a little better than before. After dealing with the internal injuries, it was much easier to deal with the external injuries. He stitched up the wound for her and applied the special healing medicine. When he felt that there were no major problems, he breathed a sigh of relief. After finishing all this, Romeo Tianlan felt that her hands and feet were a little weak. She wanted to use the cleansing spell on her again, but she felt a little strenuous. Romeo Tian rummaged through her storage space. This girl didn't seem to have any desire for beauty. Other than men's clothes, there were only men's clothes in her storage space. Romeo Tianlan really didn't fancy those men's clothes. He had a few sets of women's clothing in his storage space, and each set was perfect. Romeo Tianlan thought for a while, then took out a set of sky blue clothes and helped her change into them one by one. This dress suited her very well, making her waist look even more slender and her skin even fairer. After doing all this, Romeo Tianlan lowered his eyes to look at her, and his heart suddenly trembled. He remembered that dream. In the dream, she was also wearing such clothes and crawling at the bottom of the sea. At first glance, it looked like Ji Yu, but when she raised her head and revealed her face, it was Ji Xinyue. Chapter 2980. In the dream, the two of them had merged into one. Was this what he thought about in the day and dreamed at night, or was it some kind of warning? He caressed her pretty face and subconsciously wanted to pull out her soul to take a look. However, the moment his finger touched her forehead, he retracted his hand. He had already taken out her soul to take a look, but there was nothing similar to Ji Yu's. The result would be the same if he brought it out again. It would be a waste of energy and would be detrimental to her recovery. He stared at her pretty face in a daze for a moment. In the depths of his heart, he felt that Ji Xinyue was Ji Yu, but the results of all his probing proved otherwise. Was there something else that he hadn't thought of? Originally, he had given up on trying to find out who Ji Yu was, but he had coincidentally met Yunxi, who had wandered to this continent. Yunxi's soul-searching bird could find people based on their souls. Furthermore, Yunxi had developed the ability to travel through time and space. It could travel through time and space to find people based on the person's request. He had an idea and asked Yunxi to let the bird go to Yi Qianshang and Ji Yu's spacetime to take a look. He had accurately described the characteristics and age of that continent and offered his battle soul for the bird to smell. This way, the bird would be able to find that spacetime based on the aura of his battle soul and travel to the era when Ji Yu was still alive. The bird would then find Ji Yu, sniff out the aura of her soul, and travel back. This way, it would be able to find the real Ji Yu. He had always felt that Ji Tianyu wasn't Ji Yu, but she matched all the characteristics, so he could only use this method. The process was a little complicated. The soul-searching bird had consumed a lot of energy to complete such a large project, so it had to eat a good meal to replenish its energy. Yunxi had mentioned what the soul-searching bird needed to eat the most, so Rongyu Tianlan naturally did his best to fulfill it. This was how Ji Xinyue had seen the mirage. According to Yunxi's calculations, the soul-searching bird would need at least half a month to come back. Only 8 days had passed, so the soul-searching bird wouldn't be back anytime soon. Rongyu Tianlan massaged his throbbing temples. Forget it, let's not think about this for now. The soul-searching bird would be able to solve the puzzle once it returned, so there was no hurry. His gaze fell on the sky-blue dress she was wearing, and he frowned slightly. That dream wasn't a good one, so if she wore this dress now, it would be a bad omen. He would only let her wear this if he was crazy. He raised his hand and took off the dress for her. He was the one who put it on for her, so naturally, he took it off smoothly. However, when he was halfway through, a hand suddenly grabbed his hand. Rongyu Tianlan paused for a moment. She raised her head and met Ji Xinyue's clear eyes. At this moment, there was a trace of embarrassment and disbelief in those eyes. She's awake. After all, she was a seriously injured person. Although she managed to hold on to Rongyu Tianlan's hand that was taking off her clothes, she didn't have much strength, let alone pull him away. Rongyu Tianlan didn't expect her to wake up at this time. She had obviously suffered such a serious injury, and he had even hit her sleeping acupoint. More than half of Ji Xinyue's clothes had been taken off by him. At this moment, her upper body was naked, and her boundless spring scenery was under his palm. At this moment, his hand was still tugging at her clothes. This situation was no different from a lecher taking advantage of a person who was unconscious to take advantage of them. Ji Xinyue. Rongyu Ishinlin. Chapter 2981. No matter how thick-skinned Rongyu Tianlan was, at this moment, his handsome face blushed. Looking into her angry eyes, he coughed and explained, "This. I was helping you change your clothes." Ji Xinyue actually thought that she was going to die when she was trapped in the ice coffin. The moment her soul was about to sink into the darkness, the last image that appeared in her mind was actually Rongyu Tianlan. When they were in danger in the tunnel, he had told her to live well and not to take risks. Not only did she take risks, she was also going to lose her life. She had lived a colorful and carefree life. People who took risks often had to have the awareness to put their heads on their belts. Therefore, she was not afraid of death. Although this day came suddenly, she was not too surprised. The moment she fell into a coma, the only regret in her heart was that she could not see Rong-Yue Tianlan again. If she died like this, would he be sad when he found out? Maybe a little. After all, she had gone through so many trials and tribulations with him, and was even his fiancée. However, his sadness should be like a gust of wind, and would not leave too much of a shadow. He had countless female confidants around him, and in his heart, she was probably just an insignificant one. At that time, she did not expect that he would come to save her. After all, looking at the scene in the mirage, he should be in the south with warm mountains and warm water. Moreover, he could not have known that she was in danger here. He did not install clairvoyance on her. To her, her memory after sinking into the ice coffin was blank. When she finally regained consciousness, she found that she was being molested the moment she opened her eyes. The person who was supposed to be tens of thousands of miles away was actually sitting beside her and taking off her clothes. Ji Xinhua felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She was embarrassed, angry, and incredulous. Her face was originally sickly pale, but now it was flushed red. Although she had a forthright personality, she had never taken off her clothes so cleanly in front of others. Especially in front of a man. What was the most embarrassing thing in the world? It was clearly not doing anything bad, but being caught red-handed while taking off someone's clothes. Rong-Yue Tianlan was very embarrassed, especially under the gaze of that pair of clear eyes. Now that things had developed to this point, he naturally could not take off her clothes anymore. He first turned his back to her as if to avoid arousing suspicion. Then, he coughed and organized his thoughts. Don't misunderstand. Listen to me. The bonfire in the ice cave burned brightly, making it as warm as spring. Rong-Yue Ishanlan finally finished explaining the whole story. Ji Xinyu, who was behind her, had already rearranged her dress with trembling fingers. She wanted to sit up, but Rong-Yue Tianlan seemed to have eyes on the back of her head. A bamboo flute was placed on her shoulder. Don't move, you need to rest for your injuries. Thus, Ji Xinhua continued to lie down. Rong-Yue Tianlan also finished his story. Of course, he didn't mention that she first looked like Ji Yu in his dream. He only said that he had a feeling in his dream. After saying that, he asked, "Do you believe what I said?" Although he liked her, wanted to marry her, and had even fantasized about her before, he didn't believe her. But that didn't mean that he wanted her to think of him as a lecher, so he still had to explain himself. Ji Xinhua was silent for a while, then finally replied, "I believe you." After all, she had known Rong-Yue Tianlan for so long, so she still understood his character. He was doing this to save her. Ji Xinhua understood the principle of urgency. Chapter 2982. He treated his friends really well. Not only did he treat the lady in white well, but he also put in so much effort for her bird. He treated her well too. Sensing that she was in danger, he came all the way to save her. Looking at how pale his face was, it was obvious that he had used up a lot of energy to save her. Warmth rose in her heart, but at the same time, there was an indescribable bitterness mixed in. She herself could not figure out where this bitterness came from. It seemed to be jealousy. No, what was she jealous of? She had nothing to do with him, and she was no longer his fiancée. He treated her as well as any other woman, so she should feel grateful and satisfied. She took a deep breath and suppressed the emotions that should not be in her heart. Her body was still very weak, and her head was dizzy, but she still smiled at him, showing that she really believed him. Being believed by someone was a very happy thing, especially when it was believed by the person she loved. Rong Yuishanlan's handsome face bloomed like spring flowers, and his eyes seemed to sparkle as he looked at her. He was about to say something when Ji Xinyue spoke again. Supreme Deity Rong Yuishanlan, thank you. The smile on Rong Yuishanlan's lips faded, and he repeated as if he did not understand, thank you. Ji Xinyue nodded and tried her best to express her gratitude. I will repay you for saving my life. In the future, I will. Rong Yuishanlan crossed his arms and looked at her with a faint smile. What will you do in the future? In the future. In the future, I will repay you. Rong Yuishanlan smiled, and his beautiful eyes narrowed. This saving grace is not an ordinary grace. How do you plan to repay me? How will you repay me? Ji Xinyue. How could he ask someone to repay him so openly? Her head became even dizzier, and she could not think of anything for a moment. She just looked at him with her eyes wide open. Rong Yuishanlan said indifferently, so the repayment you were talking about is just a verbal repayment. Then don't say anything about repayment or gratitude. I don't like these empty words. Ji Xinyue, she pursed her lips and turned defense into offense. Then what do you want in return? She didn't want to owe anyone a favor. As long as she could do it, she would do it. Rong Tianlan's gaze fell on her pretty face, slowly scanning her eyes, her nose, her lips from her forehead. Ji Xinyu couldn't lie still under his gaze. If not for her weak body, she would have jumped up long ago. At the same time, alarm bells rang in her heart. If the repayment he wanted was to devote myself to him, then her alarm bell had yet to be officially rung when Rong Yue Tianlan smiled gently. The repayment I want is very simple. She bent down slowly. Was he going to kiss her? Ji Xinyue's heart raced, her fingers clenched tightly, but she closed her eyes slightly. His breath was getting closer and closer, and that faint cold fragrance was getting stronger and stronger. Her heart felt like it was being gently grabbed by someone, and then lifted up. A soft warmth fell on her forehead. When her body stiffened, the warmth quickly disappeared. She opened her eyes in astonishment. He had already stood up and said indifferently, "All right, you've already repaid me. You don't have to feel like you owe me anything." Ji Xinyue, it turned out that he had only kissed her forehead. That kiss was like a butterfly's wing, and it left as soon as it touched, without any lust. Chapter 2983. However, it was as if a faint electric current had passed through her heart, rendering her speechless for a moment. She didn't know if she was relieved or disappointed. Your body is still weak, you should rest and recover your energy first. I will help you meditate to treat your internal injuries later. Rong Yuishanlan stood up and used the quilt to wrap her up again to prevent her from catching a cold. Ji Xinyue also saw the quilt on her body clearly. She was stunned and her eyes widened. Cloud shark quilt. This is a cloud shark quilt. Rong Yuishanlan nodded slightly. He didn't expect her to be so knowledgeable. Ji Xinyue suddenly struggled, trying to get out of the quilt. Rong Yuishanlan pressed her down with one hand and frowned. What's wrong? Are there lice biting you on the quilt? Ever since she had thanked him, his words seemed to be filled with thorns, and there was a faint sharpness to them. Ji Xinyue pursed her lips. This quilt is too precious. I have blood on me, I will spoil it. Cloud shark quilt was said to be woven by the virgin shark men using the moonlight thread on a full moon night. A piece the size of a handkerchief could be exchanged for a city in the human world. The value of a cloud shark quilt that was woven directly into a quilt was even more immeasurable. Even the king of the Nantian clan might not have the fortune to enjoy it. This quilt had a special characteristic. It was really warm in winter and cool in summer. When covering the body, it could always be adjusted to the best temperature for the human body. Moreover, it was obviously a thin layer, but lying inside it felt like lying on clouds, soft and extremely comfortable. This kind of quilt could no longer be described as priceless. It couldn't be more precious. However, this quilt also had a fatal flaw. The quilt couldn't be stained with blood. Once it was stained with blood, the quilt would quickly change color and become like a tattered cotton tapestry. Although its functions were still there, its appearance would become uglier. She had bled a lot just now. Although he had already treated it, the traces were still there. If she ruined his quilt because of this, then she would owe him even more. Rongyu Ishinlan pressed his palm on the quilt on her body, making her unable to move. You know what's good for you. However, when I operated on you just now, you were lying on this bed. I don't know how much blood has stained it. If you wanted to ruin it, it would have been ruined long ago. Isn't it a little too late for you to worry about this now? Ji Xinyu's pretty face flushed red. All right. She finally stopped struggling. In the future, she would find a way to return him a treasure of similar value. He had really sacrificed a lot for her, and it wasn't an ordinary amount. Ji Xinyue couldn't help but say that. Rongyu Ishinlan stretched out a finger and pressed it on her lips. Don't say thank you again. Her words of thanks pierced his heart. He did not like to hear it. Ji Xinyu's body was weak, she didn't even have the strength to pull his fingers away. She tilted her head slightly, avoiding his fingers. I didn't want to thank you. I saw that you used up a lot of telekinesis, you should need to meditate to recover. You can pull a corner of the blanket and sit down. Rong Yuetian's eyes lit up slightly, and she agreed readily, all right. He pulled a corner of the blanket and spread it on the ice before sitting down. He frequently overused his telekinesis, and indeed needed to meditate to recover. Before meditating, he even reminded her, if you feel unwell, just call me. He was sitting right in front of her. He would be able to sense it if she moved slightly. Because they were afraid of disturbing each other, Rongyu Ishinlan meditated with his back facing Ji Xinyu. Chapter 2984. Because he was afraid that they would disturb each other, Rongyu Tianlan meditated with his back facing Ji Xinyu. Ji Xinyu looked at his tall and straight back for a moment, then closed her eyes. She also wanted to regulate her breathing to recover, but just as she did, she realized that something was wrong. Her cinnabar field was empty, and she couldn't find a trace of psychokinesis. Her mind went blank. Could it be that she had lost her psychokinesis? Had she lost her martial arts? She tried to circulate it a few more times, but it was all in vain. She closed her eyes, and her whole body seemed to be stepping in the void. She almost didn't dare to imagine what would happen to her after losing her psychokinesis. Her special experience made her very insecure, and she was used to relying on herself for everything. She always felt that she could live well on her own. Even if there was no love, no family, she could live well on her own and live a carefree life. But if she lost her psychokinesis, she would be an ordinary woman. Besides her impressive psychokinesis, she didn't know anything else. How could she live on this continent? More importantly, she still had a lot of things to do. For example, investigate Huang Qingliu's background, or Xia Fengliu's true identity. Her heart was on fire. She opened her eyes and wanted to ask Rongyu Tianlan, but he was already meditating, and there was a faint white light surrounding him. People who were meditating couldn't be disturbed, so Ji Xinyu could only swallow her questions and continue to try to transfer her psychokinesis, but her body was weak, and she had so many questions in her heart. Even when she was fine, it was easy to be distracted while meditating, let alone under such circumstances. She was so flustered that she couldn't circulate her psychokinesis. After all, Rongyu Tianlan was thinking about her, so after meditating for a cycle, he opened his eyes after an hour. As soon as he woke up, he felt that something was wrong behind him. Her breathing was a little rough. He immediately turned around, and his temples throbbed. She had a fever. And fainted from the fever. Her originally pale face was red, and her small mouth was slightly open. The hot air she exhaled could burn people to death. Rong-Yue Tianlan, logically speaking, although her injuries were serious, after his treatment, she shouldn't have a fever anymore. Where did he go wrong? Rong-Yue Tianlan quickly checked her, and after checking once, he wanted to slap himself on the head. She had a female body. If a female body was injured in such a cold place, the cold air would enter her body and freeze her blood vessels. In other words, she couldn't use her psychokinesis for the time being. If she forced herself to use her psychokinesis, it would only worsen her injuries and cause the cold to penetrate deeper into her bones. He was a little annoyed by her "thank you" just now, so he actually forgot to tell her about it before he started meditating. With her personality, she must have been practicing while he was meditating. Because of the high fever, she began to tremble under the blanket. In her coma, her teeth chattered non-stop, and her red little face began to turn pale again. Cold. Her little mouth unconsciously let out a cold breath as her body shrank even more under the blanket. Rong-Yue Tianlan looked at her for a moment, steeled her heart, and untied the blanket that was wrapped around her. She was currently suffering from a coldine injury, and the fever was just a symptom. In fact, her body was extremely cold. Simply covering her with a blanket would not be able to restore her body temperature. Only a pure yang body would be able to force the cold out of her body. The bonfire in the cave was still burning, and the cave walls were flickering. Under the blanket, Rong-Yue Tianlan hugged Ji Xinyue tightly in his arms. Both of them were only wearing underwear. Chapter 2985. Under the blanket, Rong-Yue Tianlan held Ji Xinyue tightly in his arms. Both of them were only wearing undergarments, their bodies were pressed against each other and their limbs were tightly intertwined. There was no gap between them. Rong-Yue Tianlan had never been so close to anyone in his life. Not to mention in this position. Hugging a woman in his arms was a romantic thing that all men yearned for, but Rong-Yue Tianlan felt a little sad at this moment. Men and women in this position were usually doing the most intimate things. They could do whatever they wanted without any scruples. But he was hugging his beloved and could only heal her. Was this a test of his willpower by the heavens? He looked at her in his arms and couldn't help but kiss her forehead. Xinyue, I think you owe me too much. It seems that you can only repay me with your body. She was still trembling in his arms. Rong-Yue Tianlan didn't dare to neglect her. He clasped her fingers tightly under the blanket and suppressed his restless heart. He closed his eyes and was about to circulate his power when there was a flash of light at the entrance of the cave. The moon god's sword barged in and suddenly saw such an erotic scene. It seemed to be stunned. What are you doing? It was still a pure sword. It didn't understand what this position meant. Rong-Yue Tianlan gritted his teeth and only replied with 3 words, "Get out." The moon god's sword. Rong-Yue Tianlan's aura was too strong. The moon god's sword could only leave with its tail between its legs. Time passed by. Rong-Yue Tianlan circulated the true yang in his body and transmitted it into her body through their close skin. When Rong-Yue Tianlan hugged her, he felt as if he was hugging a small hot pot, but when he circulated his telekinesis, the cold in her body was stimulated. That coldness entered his body, like a cold silver needle swimming in his body, causing him to shiver despite his profound cultivation. He didn't expect that there would be so much cold qi in her body. It seemed that her injuries were far beyond his expectations. In order to achieve his own selfish goals, he actually hurt her like this. Rong-Yue Tianlan's eyes darkened and flashed with coldness. He had to get justice for her. Another 4 hours passed. The cold poison in Ji Xinyua's body was finally forced out little by little. Both of them were drenched in sweat, especially Ji Xinyu. She looked as if she had just been fished out of the water, and even her hair was wet and stuck to her scalp. Fortunately, the color of her skin had returned to normal. It was as white as jade, and there were pearl-like beads of sweat on it. It was soft and smooth as he held it in his arms. The faint fragrance of a virgin was released along with the sweat, and it densely filled his nose. Rongyu Yishanlin once again circulated her qi in her body and felt that her blood vessels were no longer stagnant. Only then did she heave a sigh of relief. Using this method to heal her naturally consumed a large amount of his psychokinesis. The psychokinesis that he recovered from meditating just now was also completely used up. He was also very tired. After he finished cultivating, he wanted to crawl out of the blanket and put on his clothes again, but the moment he moved, he felt his limbs go soft and his vision turn black. He was too tired. He would be fine after a short rest. Just a short rest. He closed his eyes, intending to take a nap, but he didn't expect that he would fall asleep in a daze. Ji Xinyue thought that waking up from her coma to find Rongyu Tianlan stripping her clothes with one hand was the biggest shock, but she didn't expect that it wasn't the biggest shock, only an even bigger shock. When she woke up again, she found herself naked. Chapter 2986. She and him, who was almost naked, were hugging each other like yin and yang fish. Their bodies were almost completely pressed together, and Ji Xinyu could even feel the texture of his skin. His handsome face was right in front of her. It was the first time she was observing him from such a distance. His eyes were slightly closed, and his thick eyelashes formed a semicircle shadow under his eyes. His light breath blew on her face, warm and numbing. Anyone who woke up and saw this situation would be stunned. Ji Xinyu's head exploded, and all her blood seemed to rush to her face. This scene was too awkward. If it was in the past, she would have slapped him away and stuck him to the wall. But now, she just wanted to push him away subconsciously and then climb out by herself. But just as she moved her arm, it affected her wound. Before she could raise her arm, her forehead was already covered in cold sweat. And Rongyu Tianlan was not sleeping well, so he woke up the moment she moved. When he opened his eyes, he was looking at her red little face. In this situation, the two of them were extremely awkward, and Ji Xinyu's face was so red that it could steam a duck egg. Rongyu Tianlan nervously asked a nonsense question, "You're awake?" Ji Xinyu, who always boasted that she was as handsome as a man, was so embarrassed that she didn't know where to put her hands and feet. She didn't care about the pain of her wound, and desperately tried to push him away. "You let go of me first." She was only wearing a thin dudu, and her towering breasts were tightly pressed against his chest, and his legs were also entangled with hers. Ever since Rongyu Tianlan found out about Liu Xiaohui from Ning Xiuma, he often felt that his self-control was stronger than Liu Xiaohui's, and that he was a true gentleman. But now, he felt that his self-control was crumbling. He was already having a hard time holding back when he was hugging a soft and fragrant body, but now that she moved in his arms, it immediately made his manly instincts break through his self-control, and he raised his head proudly. Their bodies were still pressed against each other, and the changes in his body were naturally felt by her. Her leg was being pushed by something. When Ji Xinyu realized what it was, her whole body was almost burning. She had never scolded anyone before. "Lecher. Bastard, let go of me." She struggled even harder. Rongyu Tianlan was also extremely embarrassed. He had always had the image of a gentleman in front of her, but now he had directly become a rogue. However, her struggle obviously wouldn't work. Stimulating his manly instincts was one thing, but more importantly, her injury didn't allow her to move around like this. He had no choice but to lift his hand and hit her acupoints. You, don't move. I'll go out. The two of them were wrapped in a blanket. In order to prevent Ji Xinyu from catching a cold, Rong Yu Yishenlin had wrapped the blanket tightly just now. At this moment, it was not easy to remove it from the inside. As a result, their skin inevitably bumped into each other a few times. Ji Xinyu was, after all, a martial artist. Whenever she came into contact with someone, she would habitually check the firmness of the other party's skin, the strength of their bones, and so on. When Rong Yu Tianlan was wearing clothes, he was a tall and handsome young master. It was easy to give people the feeling that he was a gigolo. But now, under the skin contact, she could feel that his muscles were firm and strong. His body lines were perfect and full of tension. It should be very beautiful. When this thought formed in her mind, Ji Xinyue's entire body stiffened. Chapter 2987. What was she thinking about? Her face was already red, and now it was as red as a tomato. Her face was burning, and even her ears were burning. She didn't dare to open her eyes until he got out of the quilt. She heard a rustling sound. He must be changing his clothes. When he was done, she opened her eyes and said, "I think you should give me." Before she could say an explanation, she hurriedly closed her eyes again. Rong Yu Yishenlin was only wearing a pair of pants, and the robe in his hand was only halfway done. When she opened her eyes, she could still see the firm and strong skin on his upper body, and even the 2 points on his chest. You, lecher. Ji Xinyue couldn't help but scold him again. God, why was he wearing his clothes so slowly? Didn't he usually put on his clothes with a wave of his hand? Rong Yu Yishenlin was also miserable. In order to get here, he used a lot of telekinesis to travel 1,000 miles in an instant. When he got here, he dived into the sea to save people without taking a break. Breaking the ice shelf consumed a lot of his telekinesis. After coming out, whether it was condensing wood to make a bonfire, treating her internal injuries, or forcing the cold poison out of her body, it was all very taxing on his telekinesis. Even if he was made of iron, at this moment, it was as if he had been hollowed out, and his limbs were weak. Naturally, he didn't want to waste any more telekinesis to wear his clothes. It was just a normal speed. He didn't expect that in her eyes, it would become a symbol of lechery. Rong Yu Yishenlin was also embarrassed at first, but he had always been thick-skinned. When the awkwardness reached a certain level, he didn't feel awkward anymore. He slowly put on his clothes, then sat down on a futon and looked at her blushing face. Your martial arts are very good, but your vocabulary of scolding people is quite poor. Do you only know how to scold lechers? Ji Xinyue opened her eyes and glared at him. What kind of words do you want to hear? Rong Yu Yishenlin flicked his sleeves and taught her, in this case, you can still scold hooligans and vulgar. Ji Xinyue was speechless. She was so angry that she was confused. You. In her anger, the tip of her nose was sweating. Rong Yuetian took out a handkerchief from nowhere and wiped the sweat on her face. Do you want to hear my explanation? Ji Xinyue's acupoint had been sealed, so she couldn't avoid his hand even if she wanted to. She gritted her teeth. Shouldn't you explain? She was so angry that her face was red, her eyes were wide open, and her little mouth was tightly pursed. At this moment, she unconsciously revealed the nature of a girl. Rong Yuetianlan looked at her for a moment and faintly felt that her expression was somewhat familiar. It was similar to Ji Yu's embarrassed expression at that time. Although their faces were different, their expressions were surprisingly similar. Rong Yu Yishenlin's heart seemed to have been hit hard by something. He was in a daze. Ji Xinyu impatiently said, "Say something." The way he looked at her made her flustered for no reason. Rong Yu Tianlan finally regained her senses and nodded. Actually, it's not difficult to explain. He explained the situation just now and the principle of his treatment. In the end, he looked at her rather hurt and said, I sacrificed my chastity to save you again. Do you want to say thank you again? Ji Xinyue, she gritted her teeth again. I don't want to say thank you. It was her chastity that was in danger, okay? She was the one who sacrificed the most this time, okay? Not only had he seen her body, but he had also touched it. Even if they were engaged, they might not be able to do what she did with him. Chapter 2988. She didn't expect his healing methods to be so abnormal. Rongyu Yishanlun laughed instead. Well, you've finally improved. You don't thank me so much anymore. Ji Xinyu looked at him. I heard that you're a doctor who has cured countless patients. How many women have you used this method on? Rongyu Yishanlun twirled the bamboo flute in his hand. This method is not for women to use. Other women may not have such an experience. I've only used it on you. Ji Xinyu. Then. I'm so honored. If other women were like me, what would you do? She didn't realize that there was a hint of jealousy in her words. Rongyu Yishanlun replied casually, if other women were injured like this in front of me, I would probably watch her die. At most, I would give her an ice coffin. He wasn't a saint. He valued his chastity very much. Rongyu Yishanlun felt that he was the best doctor to talk to. Most doctors had a few strange rules. For example, they had to kill one person and save another. For example, they had to give the most important thing in exchange. There were all kinds of strange conditions. However, he only saved people because he liked them. If he liked them, he would save them even if they paid him. If he didn't like them, he would kick them out even if they gave him a mountain of gold. Therefore, if other women had the same illness as Ji Xinyu, he would be kind enough to give them an ice coffin. Ji Xinyu didn't expect him to answer like this. Her heart skipped a beat and she blurted out, I don't believe you. He was willing to go through so much trouble to feed the woman in white's bird. If the woman in white was injured like this, he would be willing to sacrifice his life, let alone his chastity. Of course, after saying this, her heart tightened. What was wrong with her? She wasn't usually such a calculative person. Why was she arguing with him about this? Could it be that he was jealous? When this thought popped up, she stopped herself. Rongyu Yishanlun didn't seem to expect her to say this. He looked at her and repeated, you don't believe me. Ji Xinyu finally came to her senses. She coughed and said, I just don't believe that my illness can only be treated with that method. Rong Yuetian looked at her for a moment and smiled. Then you can take it that I did it on purpose. What? This time, it was Ji Xinyu's turn to be surprised. What she said just now was just to cover up her emotions, it wasn't that she didn't believe him. Although he liked to talk glibly in front of her, he still had a bottom line and wouldn't take advantage of the opportunity to do such a thing. Rong Yuetian looked at her and said slowly, I like you. If there's a chance to repay you with my body, I will naturally give it a try. Ji Xinyu was stunned by his shamelessness. You, Rong Yu Tianlan squatted in front of her and looked at her sincerely, Xinyu, you will take responsibility, right? Ji Xinyu was shocked speechless. You? What did you say? Responsible for what? Rong Yuetian immediately looked hurt. We're already like that, don't tell me you're still not prepared to want me. The veins on Ji Xinyu's temples throbbed. But nothing happened. She finally managed to squeeze out an important word. Your chastity is still intact, although she was unconscious at that time. Chapter 2989. Although she was unconscious at that time, there was nothing wrong with her body, so nothing should have happened between them. She remembered hearing Rongyue Tianheng say that after doing that kind of thing, the man would feel good all over while the woman's waist would be sore and weak. A good man could make the woman unable to get out of bed. Ji Xinyue did not feel anything wrong with her waist, so there should be nothing between them. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her with watery eyes. How do you know that my chastity is still intact? You know quite a lot. Ji Xinyue snorted. Of course, I've been in the pugilistic world for so many years. What don't I know? Your cousin told me before. She suddenly paused. Rongyue Tianlan secretly clenched his fists. It seemed that he had to find a way to separate her from Rongyue Tianheng in the future. That guy was too unreliable. He could easily lead his future wife astray, because the topic had deviated, and even had a tendency to shift in a strange direction. Ji Xinyue decisively stopped and changed the topic. The bonfire in the ice cave was blazing, and it was as warm as spring. Ji Xinyue lay in the blanket. She felt that Rongyue Tianlan's sacrifice function was very powerful. After sweating all over, she felt much more relaxed, and even the injuries on her body did not hurt as much. The only drawback was that the duda she was wearing was already wet, and it stuck to her body uncomfortably. Besides, although he had gone out, she was still not confident enough to stay half naked in the blanket. She looked around, trying to find her clothes. But after looking for a long time, she did not see any. Needless to say, he had kept them in the storage space. She could only ask him, "Where are my clothes?" "I tore them when I was treating your injuries," Rongyue Tianlan answered straightforwardly. Ji Xinyue. She remembered the blue dress she was wearing when she woke up. At that time, he had put it on for her, but wanted to take it off for her. She did not know what he was thinking. She took a deep breath. "Then can you help me unseal my acupoints?" It was also convenient for her to take her clothes from her storage space. Although her clothes were not beautiful, they were practical. "No." Rongyue Tianlan refused and looked at her. "Your injuries are suitable for you to rest. It's not convenient for you to move around." Ji Xinyue took a deep breath and reasoned with him. "I won't move. I just want to put on some clothes." Rongyue Tian shook her head. Putting on clothes requires a lot of body movements, which will affect the wound. "Do you want me to wear it for you?" Ji Xinyue. "No need." Rongyue Ishanlin raised her hand and rubbed her sweaty hair. "That's a good girl. Now, you should obediently close your eyes and sleep. You're not allowed to forcefully circulate your power anymore." When he said this, his voice was gentle and magnetic, as if he was coaxing a child. Even his eyes were filled with affection. Ji Xinyue's heart skipped a beat, as if a small claw was scratching her heart. Her heart swelled up, and the corners of her eyes stung, as if she really was feeling wronged. Even she herself was shocked by her emotions. She realized that she might be a tough woman in front of others, but in front of Rongyue Tianlan, she was always easily aggrieved, like a little girl. She often had this feeling when she was a child, but after being abandoned and despised so many times, it gradually disappeared. She had always been good at hiding her emotions, so this time, she quickly collected her emotions and took a deep breath. Suddenly, she found the key point in his words. Chapter 2990. Can't force it. Are you saying that my power is still there? When she said the last few words, her voice trembled slightly. Rongyue Tianlan glanced at her and said, "Of course it's still there, but it was sealed by the icy qi at that time. With me here, how could I let you lose your telekinesis?" Ji Xinyue's eyes lit up, and a smile appeared on her lips. She blurted out, "Thank you." The heavy stone in her heart was finally removed, and her spirit instantly recovered a few notches, as if she had been injected with chicken blood. Rongyu Tianlan was not polite either. She leaned over and kissed her heavily on the cheek. Then, she slowly raised her head and looked at her angry eyes. Every time you thank me, I have to ask for a thank you gift here. This is not too much, right? Ji Xinyue was speechless. She gritted her teeth and squeezed out a few words, it's not too much. Who would thank him in the future? If she thanked him again, she would be a pig. Humph. Rongyu Tianlan smiled like a flower blooming in spring, and rubbed her head with his palm. You're so sensible. Ji Xinyue could not move, and could only stare at him with her eyes wide open. She was obviously angered by him. She finally stopped looking like a tomboy in front of him, and had the expression of a little girl. Rongyu Tianlan admired her expression for a while, and his heart skipped a beat. The more he looked at her, the more she looked like Ji Yu. Ji Xinyue and Ji Tianyue were sisters after all. Although they had the same father but different mothers, there were still similarities in their appearance. It was just that the two of them usually had very different temperaments, so it was not easy to notice their similarities. It was only when she showed her girlish appearance that he realized that the two sisters were very similar. It was strange, Ji Tianyue was obviously the most similar to Ji Yu, but when she acted coquettishly in front of him, he only felt annoyed and did not have the slightest interest in appreciating her. Ji Xinyue was so angry that even though she was glaring at him, he felt that she was very cute. Waves of warmth spread out from his heart, and he wanted to hold her in his arms and protect her. Her hair was still wet. Although Rongyu Tian felt that her appearance was more seductive and flirtatious, she was also afraid that she would catch a cold again. She forcefully used her telekinesis to cast a cleaning spell on her body. Finally, her hair and body were refreshed so that she no longer felt sticky all over. Rongyu Tianlan was really exhausted. After using the little cleaning spell, the tip of his nose was sweating. He wanted to use another one on himself, but he had no strength left. He simply stopped caring about it. Ji Xinyu finally realized that something was wrong with him. Did you use up all of your psychokinesis? She was slightly moved. It seemed like he was really going all out to save her. Rongyu Tianlan's eyes were filled with resentment as she looked at her with watery eyes. Giving myself to you is also very exhausting. Ji Xinyu. Fine, she was touched again. Rongyu Tianlan teased her a few more times. Ji Xinyu knew that her words were clumsy, so she pursed her lips and ignored him. Rongyu Tianlan had actually been observing her complexion. Although her face was slightly pale, there were indeed signs of improvement. She should not faint again while he was meditating. Only then did he feel relieved. He raised his hand and rubbed her hair. You should be good and rest first. I will meditate to recover. Remember to call me if there is anything wrong. Ji Xinyu had a headache. Could he not keep touching her? When she thought of reminding him, Rongyu Tianlan had already turned his back and started meditating. Chapter 2991. Ji Xinyue rested for a while and couldn't fall asleep. She opened her eyes and looked at him, her heart skipped a beat. His sitting posture was unusually tall and straight. His back view was pleasing to the eye and made one's heart beat faster. His hair was still slightly damp and his clothes were sticking to his body. It was obvious that he didn't have the strength to cast the cleansing spell on himself. This person was obsessed with cleanliness, but he was willing to make such a big sacrifice for her. Strange, from the first time she woke up, he was wearing this robe. The second time she woke up, he was still wearing this cool-looking robe. He didn't have any other clothes to change into. This couldn't be, right? She remembered that he always had a variety of things in his storage space, so he should have spare clothes. He couldn't bear to change. Could it be that this robe was a gift from a confidant? Stop. Ji Xinyue felt that she couldn't let her imagination run wild anymore. It was not like her to be so suspicious. If she continued to make wild guesses, even she felt disgusted. She didn't know that women in love were the easiest to let their imagination run wild. The more they cared about someone, the easier it was for them to overthink. Especially when the relationship between the two parties wasn't very clear, it was easier for them to worry about gains and losses. Every frown, every smile, every word and action of the other party could be guessed at. Ji Xinyue wasn't a person who thought too much, but she had seen Rongyue Tianlan's interaction with some women. He liked to tease people. For example, when they first met, during the battle with the evil dragon, he had vaguely teased her. Of course, he also saved her. For example, when he got along with Ji Tianyue, he doted on Ji Tianyue and thought of everything. He taught her how to play chess, accompanied her on the streets, and even bought her so many little things to coax her. Another example was the scene in the Mirage. He didn't just dote on the woman in White's Bird. Therefore, in Ji Xinyue's impression, Rongyue Tianlan liked to protect people, especially girls. In that case, his kindness to her now might also be a form of protective mentality. As for his teasing, could she take it seriously? Ji Xinyue had been in the Jianghu for so many years and knew many men. Among them, there was no lack of men who liked to tease girls. It was just to take advantage of them verbally. If you took it seriously, you would lose. Therefore, she couldn't be too serious about what she said to Rongyue Tianlan, lest she put herself in danger. Back then, she had sacrificed thousands of years of her reputation because of him. Now, if she were to sacrifice her heart as well, she would probably be consigned to eternal damnation. What's more, according to the rumors, Rongyue Tianlan had a sweetheart. Ji Tianyue almost became a substitute for his sweetheart. Now that he was suddenly chasing after her, who knew if he was treating her as a substitute for someone else? She was herself, and she didn't want to be anyone's replacement. Therefore, she could either treat his words as a breeze or ask him for confirmation. But would he tell the truth? Countless thoughts spun around in Ji Xinyue's mind, causing her head to hurt. She really wanted to raise her hand and knock on her head, but her acupoints were sealed and she couldn't do so. She closed her eyes. Forget it. Now was not the time to think about it. That Huang Qinglu had ulterior motives, and his junior brother, did old Ninth really have another identity, or did Huang Qinglu deliberately make it up to mess with her thoughts? Chapter 2992. If he really had another identity, then who could he be? This was the first time she had heard the name Xiejuk. This name was quite high-end, but she felt that it was more intimate to call him Xie Fenglu. Huang Qinglu had manipulated old Ninth to plot against her. What would he do next? Would he harm her sect? This last thought burned her like a fire. She felt that there was a big conspiracy behind this, but she could not guess it at the moment. She could not help but look at Rongyue Tianlan, who was meditating. In fact, she really wanted to ask him. After all, he was much older than her and knew more things. Perhaps he would know some inside information about Huang Qinglu. However, looking at the faint white light shining around him, she controlled herself and did not disturb him. He was meditating to recover. Not only could she not protect him, but she also wanted to disturb him. That would be too unkind. It was better to wait for him to recover before discussing this with him. Unable to move or circulate her qi, Ji Xinyue fell asleep in a daze. She had a dream. In her dream, she seemed to have returned to the Ziyun sect. She saw her eldest senior brother teaching his martial nephews and her master sitting leisurely in a corner, basking in the sun. The Ziyun sect was quiet as usual. In her dream, she heaved a sigh of relief. Just as she was about to go forward and greet her master, she suddenly saw Xia Fenglu and Huang Qinglu appear together. After greeting her master, Xia Fenglu presented a shining pearl to her master. The pearl was the size of a fist and looked like a small moon. The Ziyun sect master was surprised. Moonlight pearl. You went to the Tianjing Ocean. In her dream, Ji Xinyue did not remember anything about the Tianjing Ocean. When she heard her master's words, her heart skipped a beat. She vaguely remembered what happened to her in the Tianjing Ocean. Her gaze fell on the pearl. So this was the moonlight pearl. After they killed her, they picked this pearl and brought it here. She did not know what to feel in her heart. Her eyes fell on Xia Fenglu again. Xia Fengliu's expression was normal. Other than being slightly haggard, there was nothing wrong with him. He was even as glib as before in front of her master to make her happy. Ji Xinyue looked at him in a daze. She did not know what to feel. Xia Fenglu had stabbed her and almost killed her. She knew that he had been manipulated by Huang Qinglu, so she did not blame him. Instead, she was worried about him. However, she had also seen Xia Fengliu's expression at that time. He had only been manipulated and had not lost his mind. He should have remembered stabbing her. He should have even seen her being sealed in the ice coffin by Huang Qinglu and sunk to the bottom. With his feelings for her, once he regained his mind, he should have been so guilty that he wanted to bang his head against the wall, right? But now, he acted as if nothing had happened. He even plucked a moonlight pearl to please his master as usual. Ji Xinyu felt depressed. She had treated this brat with all her heart and soul, but this brat was actually an ingrate. He could still laugh so happily after stabbing her. Ji Xinyu had the urge to throw a punch at him and send him flying. Grandmaster Ziyun admired the pearl for a while, then suddenly asked Xia Fenglu, "Where is your senior sister? Isn't she always with you?" Xia Fengliu's expression froze, then he smiled and said, "We were together a while ago. This pearl was also picked by me, her, and this brother Huang. But senior sister had something to do, so she asked her disciple to bring the pearl here first. She went somewhere else." Chapter 2993. Liar. He was lying. Ji Xinyue clenched her fists and couldn't help but rush over, "Ninth brother. You bastard." She stumbled as she rushed over, and the scenery in front of her disappeared. She also shuddered and woke up from her dream. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw Rong Yuishenlen looking at her with his chin in his hand. "Did you have a nightmare?" His handsome face was too close to her. According to Ji Xinyue's incomplete vision, it was only half a foot away. His breath was almost on her face. She subconsciously moved her head back. "Don't get so close." Her heart skipped a beat as soon as she woke up. Rong Yuishenlen was obedient. He sat up straight and asked her while twirling the bamboo flute in his hand, "Did you dream of Xia Fenglu?" Ji Xinyue's heart skipped a beat again. Was this guy a roundworm in her stomach? He guessed it right. But there was something else he guessed even more accurately. "Did you dream of him stabbing you with a sword again?" Ji Xinyue looked at him dumbfounded and blurted out, "How did you know?" Rong Yuishenlen twirled the bamboo flute with his fingertips and said casually, "I guessed it." His deductive ability was too strong. Ji Xinyue sincerely asked him where he got this deduction from. Rong Yuishenlen raised his eyebrows. "What's so difficult about that?" "The wound on your body was caused by a sneak attack from behind, and the shape of the wound was obviously a dagger from the hidden sword manner. You're very guarded against people. If it wasn't someone you completely trust, it would be impossible for them to sneak up on you and attack you from behind. There aren't many people you really trust, and there's only one person who meets this condition and has that kind of dagger. Who else could it be other than Xia Fenglu?" After hearing this, Ji Shinyu was completely convinced. She looked at Rongyue Tianlan. She really felt that this person who could make such a big name in the Fanning continent did not have an undeserved reputation. She really had some skills. Can you guess why he stabbed me? Ji Shinyu originally had the habit of keeping everything to herself and thinking of ways to solve it, but now that Rongyue Yishinlan was here, she couldn't help but want to discuss it with him. Rongyue Yishinlan looked at her starry eyes and guessed, he was manipulated, right? He guessed right again. Ji Shinyu's eyes lit up even more. Go on. Rongyue Tian smiled. Do you still want me to guess who manipulated him? Ji Shinyu nodded. She did not believe that he would be able to deduce anything. Rongyue Yishinlan spat out 3 words, Huang Qinglu. Ji Shinyu's eyes were filled with questions about how Rongyue Tian had deduced it. Rongyue Tian twirled a small strand of her hair around her finger and said, this is actually not difficult to guess. This Huang Qingliu's martial arts are not low. He obviously concealed his true identity to get along with your martial siblings. Especially your precious martial brother, he has been following you very closely. Your junior brother's attitude towards him is also a little strange, as if they have known each other for a long time. I even loathed him, but I couldn't shake him off. The two of them were practically inseparable in the sword manner, so I took a few more glances at him. This time, he must have followed you guys to gather pearls. Xia Fenglu was controlled to stab you, so the mastermind behind this can only be him. At that time in the sword manor, Rongyue Yishinlan felt that this Huang Qinglu was not simple. His name was unknown, but his martial arts were unfathomable. Because Huang Qinglu had been pestering Xia Fenglu and looked like a homosexual, Rongyue Yishinlan did not think much of it at that time. He even wanted to investigate this person's background when he was free. Chapter 2994. Therefore, Rongyue Yishinlan didn't think too much about it and wanted to investigate this person's background. However, he didn't expect that before he could investigate this matter, Ji Shinyu would be the first to be plotted against by him. She had almost lost her life. No matter how unconvinced Ji Shinyu was, she had no choice but to submit to Rongyue Yishinlan. She pursed her lips and looked at him with sparkling eyes. Then, have you figured out his true identity now? Rongyue Yishinlan paused for a moment and raised his hand to ruffle her hair. No matter what his true identity is, I will naturally avenge you. I won't let him off so easily. His tone was faint, but there was a bone-chilling coldness hidden in it. He didn't care if Huang Qinglu had other schemes, but since he hurt his people, he naturally had to make him pay with his blood. Ji Shinyu's heart warmed. In the past, she always stood up for her people, but now, she seemed to be protected under his wings. The feeling of being protected was always warm, but Ji Shinyu still wanted to take revenge herself. She had to figure out Huang Qingliu's purpose for doing this. He couldn't really be jealous, right? Exalted immortal Rongyue, have you heard of Xiejuk? Rongyue Yishinlan's fingers that were holding the bamboo flute paused. He pondered for a moment. I've heard of him. Why are you asking about him? He was very meticulous. Is Xiejuk related to Xia Fenglu? Is Xia Fenglu his descendant? Ji Shinyu's heart skipped a beat. It seemed that there really was such a person as Xiejuk. However, she didn't want to tell Rongyue Yishinlan what she had heard for the time being. She only vaguely replied, I don't know if he's his descendant, but I heard them mention this person. Who is this Xiejuk? Rongyue Yishinlan turned the bamboo flute and glanced at her. He explained to her, I know that 30,000 years ago, there was a devil ancestor called Xiejuk in the devil race. He led the devil race to cause a bloody storm in the Sannin continent. Later, he was annihilated by the 4 races and the various cultivation sections. I heard that his ending was that his soul was scattered. Before he died, he cursed that he would return sooner or later, and that he would pay with his blood. Rollercoasters Ishanlin spoke calmly, but Ji Xinyue shuddered. If what Huang Qinglu said was true, then Xia Fengliu's predecessor was a great devil. It can't be. Although that brat was occasionally unreliable, he was still relatively benevolent and had a bottom line. How could he be a great devil? Maybe they have the same name. That's not right, that Huang Qinglu kept saying that she wanted him to awaken or something. She was still a little indignant and could not help but ask, what does Xia Zhuk look like? Tell me more about him. Rollercoasters Ishanlin glanced at her again. I don't know much about him. It said that he suddenly appeared back then. Not long after he appeared, he used thunderous means to subdue the devil race who were in a state of disunity. Then, he led the devil race troops everywhere to seize territory. Wherever he went, he burned, killed, and plundered. It is said that he wears a ferocious ghost mask all year round. No one knows his true face, not even his guards have seen it. Ji Xinyue couldn't help but ask, wasn't he surrounded and killed? Someone must have seen him die, right? Rollercoasters Ishanlin shook her head. It was not easy to encircle and annihilate him. The immortals had also paid a considerable price. Moreover, he was refined alive by the immortals with the true samadhi fire. When he died, he was directly refined into ashes. Ji Xinyue was speechless. She paused. Then, was there anyone with the surname Huang by his side at that time? Chapter 2995. After the incident, she pondered over Huang Qingliu's attitude towards Xia Fengliu. She had a feeling that Huang Qinglu was once Xia Fengliu's subordinate. Rollercoasters Ishanlin glanced at her again and shook his head. There is no one with the surname Huang among the famous generals by his side. The name Huang Qinglu is a complete alias. The name is fake, and so is the surname. Ji Xinyue was stunned for a moment. She frowned and did not speak. Rollercoasters Ishanlin looked at her with a rare serious expression. Xinyue, you still don't believe me. Ji Xinyue was stunned. Why do you say that? Rollercoasters Ishanlin said, you're hiding something from me. Xia Fengliu might be Xia Zhuk, right? Ji Xinyue was speechless. Where did he deduce that from? Rollercoasters Ishanlin looked at her. I think you should tell me everything you know. This is no small matter. It's best if we discuss everything we know with each other. Only then can we confirm some things. Don't worry, without your consent, I won't harm your junior brother. Ji Xinyue's misgivings were exposed. She took a deep breath and nodded. Okay. She finally told him the whole process of her operation. Of course, she did not mention the mirage. After all, it had nothing to do with the main plot. Rollercoasters Ishanlin frowned slightly. After pondering for a while, he finally said slowly, Xinyue, Xia Fengliu is most likely Xia Zhuk's reincarnation. Or rather, he is not a reincarnation at all, but an avatar. Ji Xinyue's heart sank. How can you be so sure? Rollercoasters Ishanlin finally told her everything he knew and deduced. 30,000 years ago, although Xia Zhuk did not have a trusted aide with the surname Huang, he had a Sharkman's military advisor named Huang Luqing. This military advisor was omnipotent and knew how to do anything. He had given Xia Zhuk many ideas and cleaned up a lot of messes. He had even been Xia Zhuk's substitute and used some strange martial arts, making it even harder for people to guess Xia Zhuk's origins. This Huang Luqing had hidden himself even deeper. Not many people from the devil race had really seen him. Because this person was extremely low-key, almost no one from the celestial race had heard of his name. Therefore, when they surrounded the devil race, they let this person escape. Later, they captured some of the high-ranking generals of the demon race. Under torture, these people gave up Huang Luqing. It was said that after Xie Zhuk died, the immortal world had once searched for Huang Luqing in the 6 realms. However, there was too little information about him, and no one knew what he looked like. Therefore, after searching for hundreds of years, they still couldn't find anything. Because Huang Luqing had never made an appearance again, everyone guessed that he might have died during the tribulation. Ji Xinyu's heart skipped a beat. Huang Qinglu, Huang Luqing, the names were really similar. However, wasn't it too hasty to determine their identities based on this point? Rong Yuetian seemed to understand the doubts in her heart. Legend has it that Huang Luqing is a snow shark, and the hometown of the snow shark is this extreme North Sea region. Also, the ruins of N Vortex that he created and the ice shell that sealed you were rumored to have been used by Xie Zhuk back then. They were his secret ultimate moves that he didn't use easily. You also know that Huang Luqing once pretended to be Xie Zhuk and used his martial arts, so these martial arts are Huang Luqing's. I've already checked the ice shell at the bottom of the water. There's a special incantation on it by shark men. Even your divine sword can't cut it open. Ji Xinyu's heart was in a mess. Chapter 2996. Ji Xinyu's heart was in a mess. If Huang Qinglu was Huang Luqing, then her junior brother was probably Xie Zhuk. What would he do if he awakened and recovered his memories from his previous life? Thinking of this, she couldn't lie down any longer. She immediately wanted to get up. At this moment, the acupuncture points on her body had been unsealed, and she had regained her ability to move. However, just as she sat up, Rongyu Ishanlin placed a palm on her shoulder. Don't worry, even if you find them now, you can't do anything. Recover your power first. Ji Xinyue naturally knew that she couldn't do anything with her current power. She didn't even have the strength to ride the cloud back. However, if Xie Fenglu really awakened as Xie Zhuk, it would bring a catastrophe to the Fanyin continent. She searched her body again and again, and a hand reached out in front of her. A voice transmission talisman lay in the palm of her hand. Are you looking for this? Ji Xinyue hurriedly nodded. That voice transmission talisman was the one she used to contact her master. She was still puzzled. Why do you have my voice transmission talisman? It was in your original sleeve. That sleeve has been lost. Rongyu Ishanlin conjured a pile of small items from her body like a magic trick. Here, you didn't lose anything. It's all here. Those small items were commonly used by girls. There were even 2 strange-looking strips of cloth. Ji Xinyue's pretty face flushed red again. She hurriedly put those things away and then opened the voice transmission talisman to contact her master. The call was quickly connected, and Sect Master Ziyun's lazy voice came through. Little 8, you finally remembered your master. Sect Master Ziyun only called her Little 8 when he was in a bad mood. Nothing good would come out of it every time he called her that. Originally, when Ji Xinyue heard these 2 words, the veins on her forehead would bulge, and her heart would be raised high. She didn't know what new tricks her master was going to play with her. Now, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Hearing her master's leisurely voice, there naturally wasn't any accident. She greeted her master obsequiously and said a lot of things to calm her master down. Rongyu Ishanlin sat at the side and watched her talk to her master. The corners of her lips curled up slightly. Ji Xinyue asked her master about some things. From her master, she knew that Xie Fenglu hadn't returned yet, and the Ziyun sect was peaceful. She heaved a sigh of relief. After thinking for a while, she couldn't help but remind him, Master, is there any movement from the devil sect? I vaguely heard news of the devil ancestor Xie Zhuk reviving, but I don't know whether it's true or not. Master, should we be on guard against this? Sect Master Zi Yunza's master asked Xia Ji Xinyue's Ye's soul. He's reincarnated revived. Is this news true? So her master also know this devil. There's master's master, 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 there's a S hearts, masters, master Zi Yun. Sect Master Zi Yun laughed. That devil is an ancient devil, much older than master. Even if he revives, he will still be old and dim-sighted. He won't be able to create any waves. Don't worry. Obviously, he didn't take Ji Xinyue's advice to heart. Ji Xinyue steeled her heart and said, Master, if he revives, he might be a newcomer. Maybe someone with ability will awaken, or someone around you, such as one of your disciples. They might not know their identity before, but they suddenly awakened. I don't know what they will do after awakening as Xie Juk. In short, Master must be careful. Chapter 2997. The master and disciple chatted for a while more before Ji Xinyue closed the sound transmission talisman. Connecting the sound transmission talisman took a bit of telekinesis, so Ji Xinyue was a little out of breath after speaking. Rongyu Yishanlin calmly pressed his hand on her back and helped her smooth out her meridians. Why didn't you tell your master directly? Ji Xinyue bit her lip. After all, it's not completely confirmed yet. She wanted to remind her master to be on guard against Xie Fenglu, but she thought that if Wang Qinglu had mistaken him for someone else and Xie Fenglu was not Xie Juk, wouldn't that be a big mistake? It would also cause 10,000 points of damage to her sensitive junior brother. Rongyu Yishanlin did not say anything else. He turned to her and held her hand, placing his palm against hers. Come, I'll help you check your qi and blood first. This way, you can recover faster. Ji Xinyue looked at his lowered eyebrows and understood that he understood her scruples. She also knew that he understood her eagerness to go back. He was extraordinarily considerate and understanding. The woman who could marry him was really lucky, don't worry too much. Even if he awakens, it will take a long time for him to recover to his previous level. There won't be any problems for the time being. Calm down and don't let your imagination run wild. Rongyu Yishanlin sensed her absent-mindedness and comforted her. Ji Xinyue blushed and nodded. Rongyu Yishanlin's gaze fell on her face. He half-jokingly asked, Why are you blushing? Could it be that you were distracted because of me? Ji Xinyue blushed even harder, but she glared at him fiercely. Don't be narcissistic, I wasn't thinking of you. This sentence, coupled with her burning face, was simply a synonym for 300 taels of silver hidden here. Rongyu Yishanlin looked at her red face and smiled slightly. Let me guess what you were thinking of me. Is it that the woman who wants to marry me is very lucky? Ji Xinyue's hand trembled and her eyes widened. You? How did you know? She almost blurted out the words, but fortunately, she stopped in time. Rongyu Yishanlin suddenly leaned close to her and planted a kiss on her eyelashes, then calmly left. You what? Do you think I'm quite smart? Ji Xinyue paused for a moment, then finally gave him a sincere evaluation. You're quite thick-skinned. The two of them chatted and laughed for a while, and the relaxed atmosphere finally relaxed Ji Xinyue's tense nerves. Rong Yuetian also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. If she was tense and impatient, it would take twice the effort to heal her and it would not be beneficial for her later recovery. The two stayed in the ice cave for a total of 5 days. With Rongyue Tianlan, the godly doctor, by her side, Ji Xinyue's injuries healed very quickly. Of course, later on, when Ji Xinyue was meditating to heal herself, Rongyue Tianlan also took the opportunity to meditate and recover. In addition, the moon god's sword could catch fish, so they did not have to worry about food, and the two of them got along very well. Ji Xinyue's injuries this time were not ordinary injuries. Even if she recovered quickly, it would still take half a month to fully recover. However, Ji Xinyue could not wait. She was afraid that something would happen to the sect during this period of time, so she contacted the people of the Purple Cloud sect almost every day. She did not dare to contact her master often, in case he became suspicious, so she contacted her eldest senior brother, Feng Wuji, the most. Fortunately, she heard from Feng Wuji that the Purple Cloud sect had been peaceful, and even the entire Fanine continent was peaceful, so she was slightly relieved. 5 days later, Ji Xinyue's external injuries had basically healed. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.